everybody, Patrick Connor here, and welcome to the Knuckles and Gloves podcast. More boxing history. We're closing out the greatest punchers series, which means I'm here with my guy Aris Pina, CompuBox operator, knows a little something about punching, also fight history guy. What's up, man? How are you doing, man?
Not too bad, my friend. Not too bad. Yeah, we're closing out our heavyweight punchers series today. It's been a lot of fun. We've been going back and forth, talking, reminiscing about some of our favorite fighters. And wouldn't be right if we didn't mention the passing of one of the greatest punchers of all time. We discussed him on a past show, but just and mention at least R.I.P. Ernie Shavers, who passed away. What was that? Some point last week or so, at the age of 78. And yeah, man, Shavers. We've discussed his whole career, so I'm not going to get into it. But it's sad because not only was he a very, very exciting fighter, one of the greatest punchers of all times, who had lasting memories for a lot of fans. But if you had the chance to meet him, and I was blessed to for a number of times at the Hall of Fame over the years, then you realize how much of a nice guy he was too. And he was just a really, really humble, quiet, kind-hearted individual with the most massive hands you would ever see. So you understand why, he was just cold cocking dudes left and right. Guy was literally carrying bricks for fists. So rest in peace, sir.
He was a good sized guy too. Like he wasn't he wasn't like the height of like a George Foreman's pretty tall. There are a number of like Lennox Lewis, like 6'5", 6'6". There are a number of fighters that are like really tall. He wasn't that tall, but he was just a big, broad guy.
Mean, scary looking individual.
But surprisingly soft spoken, it sounded like.
Totally. No, he was just really humble. He kind of spoke like in a quiet whisper that like you had to lean in a little bit to really hear him. And yeah, just complimentary of everybody, had time for everybody. And he was proud of his accomplishments. I mean, he didn't become heavyweight champion, but look, he's talked about more than a good percentage of former champions out there. So definitely left his impact.
No question. He's without a question. Even people who don't know a whole lot about boxing history name him as one of the hardest punchers of all time. So he left his mark without question. It's unfortunate that he passed away, but he definitely lived. It sounds like a long, fruitful, pretty happy life. But I'm happy
listen to this story though, really quick. That's the quickest thing I read on the old boxing.com website. There was a thing where I think it was Tex Cobb's wife said that they had some kind of function, whether it was an autograph function or some kind of thing that they had to go to. And it was Tex Cobb, and think of this crew that stood in the same room together. Tex Cobb, Ernie Shavers, and Michael Dokes. And they're all kind of staying. And Cobb's wife said she woke up to the visual of Dokes was naked or semi-naked and watching a porno. Cobb was in the corner smoking a joint, and Shavers was in the other corner reading the Bible.
Jesus. All right, then. That's the three genders, the three extremes. Right. Jesus Christ. That's hilarious, dude. It's somewhat frightening, somewhat hilarious, but that's pretty good, dude. Well, I'm happy that we got to talk about Ernie as one of the greatest punchers and kind of discuss his career a bit before he passed away. I mean, not that that's necessarily, I guess, any consolation, but I'm happy that we got to do that. Because without question, one of the greatest punchers of all time. And as I said, kind of on the first episode where we started doing this, nobody's really gonna get mad that we're talking about great punchers or fun knockouts or anything like that, because that's always a fun thing to talk about and a fun thing to we've encouraged people as we've been doing this to, when there is footage, go back and watch, go back and see for yourself. Like that's the best way to do this. We have fun talking about it, but go back and look for yourself for sure. But there's no question the sport of boxing has been absolutely chock full of really, really great punchers. So to close out this third episode, who's a great puncher that we didn't bring up before and we got to talk about now?
One of my all-time favorite fighters, in fact, probably yours too, and probably everybody's, man. You know what I mean? Miracle Matthew Saad Muhammad, who I consider probably the greatest action fighter ever. And you have to put him as one of the, premier punchers of not only of his time, but of all time.
Absolute scary puncher. But then he has like several fights that were all like fight of the year contender worthy. I mean, there's like several fights on his, like, just go on to BoxRec, go down his, there's like several fights on there that you could watch that are just like back and forth slugfests, or if not necessarily slugfests, just instances where he got the shit kicked out of him or got cut real bad or he got knocked down or wobbled like several times and then came back to just blast the shit out of the guy. He was unpredictable and wild, and his entire backstory and everything makes for
incredible backstory. You can make a movie on it. Luckily, we're getting a couple of books, and pretty soon, in fact, on his life. So that's something to look forward to. But the gist of it, and I'm sure you can add to this, Pat, but like, he was born Maxwell Antonio Loach, correct?
Yep.
And he was abandoned very young. I think it was that his mother instructed his older brother or something like that to take him and bring him to.
I want to say it was actually, if I'm not mistaken, and this will be confirmed in the books, I'm sure, but I believe it was his mom had died young, and so he was in the care of an aunt.
Okay.
And then the aunt instructed her kids, who were his cousins, to go take him out onto the street and leave him.
And that's what and that's where he was left. And nuns found him, and that's when he was he was renamed Matthew Franklin, because he was found on the Franklin Park, like around.
Yeah, it was Benjamin Franklin Parkway in Philly. And I've heard two stories. The first story was that they had asked him what his name was and that he did not speak well, or that he was really young, and that they misunderstood him when he said Maxwell and they thought he said Matthew. So they named him Matthew, but he didn't know his last name. And then the other story that I heard was that they were nuns and they were Catholic, so they named him after Saint Matthew. I don't know. I don't know how you could really confirm that, I guess, unless it was from him, directly. Mm. But in any case, that's kind of burying the lead here. The actual meat of the story is the tragedy in that, and how, as a young child, that framing your worldview is going to be tough. And so he was obviously, from the very start, he had a tough life. He even had a difficult life after being brought in by the nuns and got into trouble fairly frequently, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it turned into a very typical story, the kind of story that we almost would have been talking about on one of our true crime episodes or something like that. But luckily he found boxing. And so that's another stereotypical story we've told, where somebody finds boxing, and it didn't end nearly as tragically, thank goodness. But he gave us so much action. Like, it's unreal. Absolutely. And thankfully a lot of it's on TV.
Totally. And what's interesting is that there's not a lot of footage of his earlier career, like I'm going to talk about, like in the early to mid 70s. And he came up tough in the Philadelphia circuit. I mean, as they all did, but he fought a who's who back then. And he wasn't known as the slugger we watched with, we all of us being awe and adoration. He was more of a boxer back then, by all accounts, and it was the fights he was having really close decisions, whether he was losing them, winning them by split decision, or they were a draw. And he was fighting guys like Marvin Campbell, who never became a premier light heavyweight, but went on to become the first cruiserweight champion. A very tough all-around guy. Split a pair of fights with him. Had to go to Campbell's hometown for one of the fights, and another one I think was in Cali. Went to Mate Parlov, who an Olympian, and then another guy from the mid to late 70s, who was awkward, tough. Where was he from? Yugoslavia. And
he's like a Yugoslavian hero, like they fucking beloved.
Yeah. Became WBC light heavyweight champion. Then eventually he fought Campbell for the vacant cruiserweight title. So another guy, he had to go to his background. He had to go to his own, definitely wasn't in America to fight him. And he was barely able to escape by with a draw. Soon after that, he fights Eddie Mustafa Muhammad in a battle of future champions. Loses a close decision to him. So it was after the Eddie Mustafa Muhammad fight where Saad Muhammad decided, still Matthew Franklin at this point, by the way, but that's when he decided at this point where he was like, you know what, he had to change things around, because him trying to be a boxer and still going to decisions just wasn't working because the fights that he felt he was going to win, sometimes he wasn't getting a decision, and his career was kind of getting stagnated a little bit. Once he turned that curve afterwards, and by 1977, things started really changing for him. You know what I mean? Soon after, he had his first fight with his nemesis, Marvin Johnson. And my God, man, both of those fights were incredibly brutal. The first fight wasn't for the championship. It was for the NABF title, which still back then we've discussed. That was a very prominent belt if you weren't going to be if you weren't a world champion. And Johnson, former Olympian himself, he's undefeated at this point, probably the guy that was favored because Saad Muhammad had a few losses at this. And they went to war. This is a fight that was definitely shown on the old ESPN Classic channel. I remember watching it back in the day. I'm sure you do too. And
Totally.
That was one of the fights that, like, the early fights of Saad that you were like, holy shit, man, look at this warrior in the ring, because he got his ass kicked early on in it. You know, Marvin Johnson was one of those guys. He was a machine. He could punch hard. He was a southpaw, really good skills, all around talent. And if you wanted to throw it out with him, he'd throw it out. And so those guys' styles just meshed.
Good fighter, but he always looked like he was like 52.
Yo, that's whole, like, you know, George Jefferson, Sherman Hemsley, like, you know, yeah. And back then, he still had
moving on up for sure.
Hair. Yeah, he still had the hair back then a little bit, but you could see the receding hairline. And then by the time they had the rematch for the championship, yeah, he went full on halo. But,
yeah, he was like Bobo Olsen, dude. Like that fool just started going bald real young and just looked old.
I mean, I think more so that was why his nickname became Pops or Great Pops or whatever in the early to mid 80s when he became on that comeback. Instead of it being because he was only like 33 or 34. But anyways, by the late 70s now, that's when Saad started really hitting his stride in terms of having absolute wars with guys early on. This was before he became champion. The Marvin Johnson fight, you've never seen it, go back and watch. That fight is absolutely incredible. The fight with Billy Douglas, I'm not sure. I've never seen it. I'm not sure if you have. But
I can't say that I have.
Was definitely brutal as hell. Billy Douglas was I'm sure most people who listen to the show know that, but Billy Douglas was Buster Douglas's dad, Dynamite Billy Douglas, and a badass fighter in his own right, who fought frequently in the Spectrum, Philadelphia, even though he wasn't from there, and just all around really, really tough contender from the era. Never became champion, but just fought a who's who of guys and won some, lost some, but gave everybody hell. So soon after that, he'll get Richie Cates, and then he has his first fight with Yaki Lopez, which, again, the styles just mesh perfectly together. And it's another absolute war that Saad has. And this is all before pre-championship. We know him for his fights, you know, being televised all the time for his championship fights. This is all pre-title, and he's already going through the ringer already. So, I mean, the odometer is already ticking on his career at this point. But there was still, after the Lopez fight, now it was time. It's 1979. He's going to fight Marvin Johnson in a rematch, this time for the world championship. And that's when the real fun begins.
Yeah, dude. He right around this time too, not that we just didn't bring it up when we were talking about the first Marvin Johnson fight, but Marvin Johnson was like a Golden Gloves champion. He was like a really good amateur. Yeah, he wasn't just some chump. He gets kind of pushed on. He gets like swept under the rug a little bit, unfortunately, when it comes to talking to some records and stuff like that. Partially because he lost to Saad Muhammad twice, I think, and that wound up being just a bit of a knock on his career as far as not really being able to get over, you know, get through Saad Muhammad. I mean, and that's
Eddie Mustafa Muhammad and Michael Spinks too. So that kind of like put him at a
right. He could never quite get past that. He won a world title, but he could just never quite get past like the really good fighters in the division. So regardless, though, he was a really good fighter, and he went to war again with Saad Muhammad. So I mean, like, what are we at, like, you know, half dozen, 7, 8 wars for Saad Muhammad already, and this is like his title winning effort, you know. So and this is even just where it starts to heat up. I mean, this is where it starts getting good. I mean, and a lot of this stuff by now was starting to be on TV too, so you could see almost all of these fights on YouTube, thank goodness. But yeah, I mean, he Saad Muhammad and Marvin Johnson just went back and forth. But there were, I can't remember what round it was. It was either 5th or 6th round where they're just like, you know, a good example would be, because we've seen it so many times and seen clips of it and people might be able to relate to it, but that portion in the 5th round of Morales Barrera 1, where they're against the ropes and they're both just like, you know,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
just not even like moving their heads and just doing that type of shit. There's a couple points where Saad Muhammad and Johnson just start kind of doing shit like that, but they're much bigger fighters who can both punch. And it's like they're dinging each other around and like, it's like rock'em sock'em shit. It's great. And I mean, again, it's just one of many wars, but it was a really culminating moment for Matthew Saad Muhammad. Cause like you said, he had real difficulty earlier on in his career staying consistent and getting wins. And it was clear that at this point that he was on a tear, you know, like he was starting to peak and that he had kind of come into his own or whatever. And that embracing that kind of identity as a warrior that's what got him over that.
And he was like a welcome addition. Like he felt like he belonged in the wave of the late 70s, early 80s, you know? He's a good looking guy. He had a great smile, a great personality.
Incredibly competitive division.
Totally. And he just like he made perfect for perfect television. He made good interviews. He, like I said, he looked well. So it was like everything was just made well for him. Like he was just a built-in star. So the networks definitely wanted to feature him for his fights, you know? And like you said, the fun was just beginning at that point. His first title defense is against former champion John Conti. Conti, again, another tremendous fighter who, at this point, though, he became champion around 1974. And so, I mean, he's kind of from like a slightly different era, but he's still been hanging on. His career was like going through like a little bit of topsy-turvy thing, you know? He got stripped of his belt. He was struggling a little bit here and there, but he was still a quality guy, never really taken any beatings, and he was still a top performer.
And he's a celebrity too. Like in the UK, he was definitely a celebrity.
Totally. A really, really popular fighter. Another guy who had fought on the States before too. Remember, he was featured. He was going to be a heavyweight at first, and he was featured on some Ali undercards, and he worked with Ali, and then he asked Ali for advice, and Ali told him go back to light heavyweight. Like, and that's what he did. So, and he thrived there. But anyways, like I said, now Conti had a chance to finally. He lost a close decision to Mati Pavlov, which he got robbed of. He got stripped of his title before that. Like, you know, this was his redemption. And he put on a really inspired effort in this first fight. And it was a really controversial fight. And the fact that Saad suffered some nasty, gnarly cuts, you know, which become like a staple of his future fights, but some really nasty facial wear going on. And his cornerman used some substances that were definitely not legal. I don't remember what exactly they were, but they were stuff that clearly closed the cut, but stuff that you weren't able to use. And back in the late 70s and early 80s, they were a little bit more lenient in terms of things you could use in the corner, as opposed today where it's mostly just like, you know, Vaseline and pressure things and whatever like that. But even back then, they were just like, nah, this is bullshit. What the hell are you using over here? You can't just use some kind of shit that's going to turn to cement and put it on your forehead. Like, that's not cool. So Saad ends up eking out a close decision. Like, Conti looked like he was on his game and it looked like he was going to pull it out. But Saad rallied and pulled out a really close decision. Another bitter pill to swallow for Conti. And the controversy was there that they were like, we need to have an immediate rematch.
Yeah. One of his cutmen, one of Matthew Saad Muhammad's cutmen, was this dude named Adolf Rotako, who was a local Philly guy. And he was a cutman, and he was a cutman for hire too. And so I don't want to go too far out in left field into it, but long story short is that like you could be kind of like a freelance cut person. And so if you came to a fight and you felt you needed a separate cut man, and there was one there, you could potentially hire them on the spot and stuff like that. And he was somebody who would sometimes do that. Long story short, cut men, like it's like an ancient religion, dude, you know? And as you, I'm sure know, this was far more common back in the day. It's far more closely monitored now, but back in the day, cutmen used to make their own liniments and their own little solutions and whatever. Totally. And sometimes they'd literally like, I'm trying to think of who it was. It might've been like Al Certo or somebody. They would talk about how they had a little fucking leather bag that, you know, like one of the ones, like a doctor bag that, you know, like, you know, one of those motherfuckers. and that they would carry it around, and that they'd have all their solutions and their tape and their scissors, all that type of shit. It was like a little doctor bag. And so that was not uncommon back in the day and Adolf Rotako was an old school guy, went back, and I want to say like the 40s or 50s. So he had some sort of solution that he'd fucking concocted that had like green tea leaves or something like that in it, at least according to BoxRec. I don't think I've ever really truly looked it up, but in any case, yeah, so that's really it's not that crazy, I guess. It's not like he was like putting fucking meth in his guts or something, you know. But regardless, it's like you can't just put any old shit in there. That's not fair. You know, it's like you can't like let a fighter drink whiskey between rounds or some shit. That's not fair. So in any case, yeah, that controversy meant they had to run it back.
They did, and it's interesting you bring up the leather case thing, because years ago when I was working at Brooklyn College for Hank Kaplan's collection of memorabilia, Freddie Brown's collection came in as well, and one of the things that was in that collection,
maybe it was Freddie Brown, but yeah, it was like a famous cut man. Yeah.
Well, no, because that was all of them though. Like all those cut men did the same thing. They're all the same guys. They probably traded secrets, all that.
Little fucking bowler cap or some shit. Yeah.
He had the same. You know, I don't know if it was leather or whatever, but he had some kind of satchel thing there, and it was filled with all, and it still had some solution in some of them shits, bro. Like if you felt there was like these tubes of all these things, and I'm like, whoa. And I wish, you know,
that's crazy.
I had the foresight to be like, you know, I had a good enough camera phone back then to really take photos of the iPhone I had take, it wasn't a wrap, because that's all like amazing history right there, man. These are like the ointments and the things that he used on Marciano and Duran and countless other champions throughout the years.
Who knows if that shit just got thrown out? Like, fuck.
So, I mean, no, it's fascinating stuff. It is. But yes, at the end of the day,
we could get caught just going into that for a day. But yeah, it definitely was crazy shit.
Yeah. So he has a rematch, and Saad has one of his best performances and stops Conti. After another, excuse me, shit. After another defense, that's when the fun really starts beginning, because now he has the rematch with Yaki Lopez. Yaki Lopez, always a bridesmaid, never a bride. And any other era definitely would have been a champion. I mean, you could say that for a lot of guys, but Lopez for sure, man. The guy was just a beast. You know what I mean? Like, but he was caught again, like so many countless other fighters. He was caught in one of the worst errors you can possibly imagine to try, in one of the most competitive errors to try to win a world championship. It is what it is. Yeah. But Lopez came so close. God bless him. He really came so close, man. And in this fight with Saad Muhammad, dude, he put on probably the best performance of his career. Like lots of guys end up doing against Saad. They bring out, Saad brings out the best of guys. He did. And you know, like you mentioned with the Marvin Johnson fight, how they had that tremendous round. Probably my favorite round of all time is round 8 of Saad Muhammad Lopez, because when, you know, it's already been a really good fight and a very competitive fight. Saad's cut as always, but he looks like he's, you know, his volume and everything is starting to take Lopez over. And when round 8 happens and you see Saad start really turning it up, and you hear Gil Clancy and Tim Ryan, who, granted, those two added so much greatness to this drama of it. They hear him, they're like, look, you know, Saad's starting to really turn it on. Here comes Saad, here comes Saad. He's hitting him, boom, 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 boom. All of a sudden, Lopez starts countering with these beautiful, vicious right hands and hooks to the body. And you can see like the growl on his face. He just comes, bop, bop. And then Saad is just kind of like, whoa, whoa, you know, and it hits him again, boom, boom. And then Saad starts smiling.
Yeah, the smile.
When he started smiling, he was kind of hurt, and he let me lean back and let me just kind of ride this out a little bit. And you hear Gil Clancy, who I've criticized before as an announcer, but he was awesome here. He just gets really excited, and you hear him go, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Like he's a trainer right now or something. You know what I mean? Like he was just something he'd be yelling for Lopez to do it himself. So you hear him, beautiful, Tim. Oh man, what a comeback! What a comeback! And Tim Ryan is there trying to like, oh man, and Saad Muhammad is hurt. Saad's on the ropes, and he was hurt. And Lopez came back with this vicious volley, body shots, head shots, boom, 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 and he's landing all of them. But unfortunately for Lopez, Saad had
Matthew Saad Muhammad.
Yes, he was built for this type of thing, man. He was just, you know, a shock absorber, and he took it. And before you know it, you know, Lopez started looking like all the boxcar opponents that Homer Simpson had to fight back in the day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, dude.
And
Oh man.
he starts wearing out, starts getting like weary, and then Saad eventually stops him. But my God, that was a brutal fight.
Yeah, dude, that was an incredible round. Really back and forth. And it was, I'm pretty sure it was round of the year
No, absolutely.
that
Should have been
year.
round of the decade when you think, oh no,
Yeah.
it can't be because Hagler Hearns happened. But
Yeah, there's a lot of really competitive fucking man. The 80s were really incredible for fights, bro. Like straight up. Like, I mean, and that's
so
not,
jealous of everyone who covered boxing that decade.
I mean, people talk about golden eras and stuff like that, and there were a lot of shitty things about the 80s. But usually, when they say stuff like that, or when they talk about that type of stuff, they're talking about the heavyweights, though. Like they're not even, like that's they do say as the heavyweights go, so goes boxing. That's not really true. It's just true as far as people talking about it. Like it's not. There's all sorts of shit always going on. It's just that when we frame it, they're always talking about the heavyweights. But yeah, dude, the 80s had some really incredible fights, and Saad Muhammad was in a whole bunch of them. That second Yaki Lopez fight was clearly, if it's not the best fight of his career, it's like, one of the top three or something like that. I mean, it's just an incredible fight. And Yaki Lopez, like you said, dude, came so close to winning a world title on a couple of different occasions, and just got raw luck himself. He was prone to cuts, prone to swelling. Didn't have the greatest defense, but was better than advertised. Though he wasn't just some like punching bag, but he didn't have. I think his problem was that he was kind of slow. He didn't have very quick hands, didn't have quick feet, and that was the big issue. But in just about any other era, his work rate and his just his heart, the intangibles or whatever, those would have pulled him through in just about any
And
other
you come
era.
around just only a few years later in the mid 80s when you had the likes of, Slobin and Kakar and JB Williamson and even Bobby Ches for that matter, vying for the titles. Like Virgil Hill, again, a Hall of Famer, but a guy that probably actually would have beat Lopez. But you had Virgil Hill, and then you had the rest of them. You can't tell me that he couldn't have beaten a guy like Leslie Stewart. So, but anyways,
Yeah, I wouldn't have picked him against Virgil Hill, but just about anybody else during that time, sure.
Totally. But to think about it, that was probably the beginning of the end for Saad. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
Because that fight definitely took a lot out of him. He looked good against Lottie Mawali, another guy who was a really tough contender during the era, and that's a beautiful one-punch knockout he scored. But fights after
super
that,
dramatic.
Yeah, man, it's poor Mawali because he suffered really bad knockouts against a few guys.
That shit's like that clip of Dave Chappelle on the Chappelle Show with Godzilla.
Yeah. Poor Mawali, man. He was a good fighter, but he actually suffered some highlight reel knockouts against a few guys. Mustafa Muhammad scored a vicious one against him. Virgil Hill, a decade later, did the same. I mean, but good fighter. Anyways, but then it was the fights after that again. He started really struggling. Bonzel Johnson, who was a good fighter, but no world beater, even in that era, he wasn't going to be like, there was levels there, was giving Saad the business for a number of rounds before Saad rallied. And then another guy we've talked about before, because his affiliation with the Tough Man circuit, Murray Sutherland, the first super middleweight champion. But again, certainly no one who was going to be who was going to snip at the title back in the early 80s. And Saad went life and death with him. He
gave him about all he could handle.
Yeah, he was really struggling in that fight before he ended up scoring a come from behind knockout. And then his last successful defense was against another perennial contender. I mean, Saad went through the gauntlet. Let's say it right there. Another contender, Jerry the Bull Martin. Grinding, really, really tough dude. Darrell James Scott, who was, going through his run at Rahway and gave everybody business. So Saad went through the ringer at that point. You know what I mean? A number of wins, number of stoppages, only one fight going the distance in his whole title fight run. And you would still hope that there was still going to be a lot going, but he was easy pickings at that point. So when Dwight Cowie ends up fighting him, it already would have been a tough style for him to handle, as opposed to if he was still fresh, let alone what happened to him when he was just gone through the ringer. So
he'd been softened up quite a bit. I mean, and even then, it's not like he was a shell of himself, but he did still have a little bit. It's just that clearly he had been ground down and he didn't have the punch resistance that he had previously. Like it's like he was a cat that had gone through like 8.5 lives. He
Yes.
didn't even have a full one left, you know. But even then he was a tough guy. You know, he was not going to be easy to put away. He wasn't going to be easy to run through. It was just that Dwight Muhammad Qawi, especially at light heavyweight, was a bruising fighter. He was not an easy fighter to deal with. And so, like you said, he would have been a difficult fighter for Saad to deal with pretty much at any time. But at this point, after he'd been softened up, nah, that second Yaki Lopez fight was clearly the decline. Because I mean, like it wasn't abrupt, but you could see that he was going downward from there for sure. And after the first Kawi fight, it was like, all right, well, I don't know how much he has left.
Deep like dive with his career after the second Kawi fight, because he got the shit kicked out of him in that fight. Like it wasn't competitive the second fight, and he had one more highlight after that. We talked about Pete McIntyre before in the Mike Corey podcast briefly, but that's a highlight reel knockout if there ever was one. And you see, like, kind of, he hits him with a right hand. McIntyre's throwing a punch at the same time. And after Saad hits him, McIntyre still goes through with the punch, but then, like, goes down. So he, like, hits him and he goes, like, dramatically falls. And Saad, Ali pulls his hands up as he goes down. And,
yeah, it's some Julian Jackson shit. Like, gets him as he's falling, just fucking. But, I mean, that's about all he had. Man. Yeah, after that, there's a lot of stoppage losses.
The majority of his losses came after that, and people would just be like, please, you shouldn't. And it was tough, man, because Saad, he ran out of money. He lived a very high profile lifestyle in the early '80s. Lots of celebrities did, and he blew through money. He went through other things, and with his skills diminished, and guys just used them as easy pickings. And we've talked about before, people being used as a name. It's not necessarily that you got to make money as a name. People just want to use you to pad their records, and that's what ended up happening to him.
Unfortunately, yeah. I actually remember, I don't remember watching it, but I remember hearing about it like around that time. I don't remember why, but his loss to Andrew Maynard in the early 90s, like, yes. I don't know what it was about that fight. Maybe it was that what Andrew Maynard was, kind of an up and comer and stuff like that. But there was even just between, those early 80s and whatever that was, 91, 92 with Andrew Maynard, dude, there's a lot of losses. There are a lot of losses there. And there are in a lot of places there. Quality Inn Hotel, Newark, Showplace Arena, Mechanicsville, Millsap Community Center, Weirton. I don't even know where the fuck Weirton is. I don't know what that state that is. Not even going to look.
And then sometimes you get sent overseas too to lose to some up and comer.
So it's clear, like you nailed it. He was getting used for his name. He was still enough of a name, even into the late 80s and early 90s, that clearly he was being brought in to lose against a bunch of these fighters. So, and that's unfortunately just kind of a typical story in boxing, but nonetheless, clearly the guy was an incredible fighter, a great puncher, and a serious action fighter.
Oh man, incredible. And just a hell of a nice guy too. He was really
I've heard that, yeah.
He was really popular, and by the time he got inducted, I believe his first year of eligibility, I wasn't voting back then. He became a staple at the Hall of Fame for a number of years. In the early years, I would go to the Hall. So we're talking 2000 up until maybe 02, 03 or so. He was always there. He was there. He was really accessible to fans. He was cool. He was training fighters and training young amateurs at that point in Philadelphia. So he would bring some of the young kids he was training with him to the Hall of Fame and stuff like that. And and he still looked good at that point. I know the fall after that was pretty sad, and the stuff he had to go through with homelessness and other things that he went through. But yeah, man, Saad Muhammad had to be mentioned. I wanted to make sure I got him right off the bat. Just one of my all-time favorite fighters, and
yeah, it was a massive bummer when he died about 10 years ago, because he hadn't been in the news very much, but then he had been in the news for something. Like he was doing something. I can't remember what it was, but it was some sort of like charity or I can't specifically remember, but he had been doing something. It sounded like he was doing well, and then he just kind of abruptly, out of nowhere, at least that I knew of, passed away. And I was like, oh man, that sucks, because he wasn't even that old.
Wasn't.
But I guess you kind of get used to that a little bit as a fight fan. But anyway, yes, I'm happy that you brought him up, because Matthew Saad Muhammad's definitely a fun fighter to talk about, somebody we should talk about. Another fighter that I definitely want to bring up, fun fighter, should be fun to recall because he was in our lifetime and recent enough that some, younger listeners might remember him, or watchers, viewers, whatever. Felix Trinidad.
Tito. Oh yeah.
Yep. Definitely a legendary Puerto Rican puncher for sure. And yeah, the first fight actually that I ever attended in person was either, was it 92 or 93, against Blocker, Maurice Blocker.
Wow.
Yeah, the San Diego Sports Arena. And I mean, I don't remember a ton about it, I'm not gonna lie, but like nonetheless, I was there. And San Diego Sports Arena, I don't even think that shit's called that anymore. Definitely a very similar venue to like a Staples Center or something like that, super similar to that. But yeah, I remembered Felix Trinidad and his career very well for a handful of reasons, but also because he was super duper popular when, you recently brought up on a different show when like boxing started kind of hitting the internet, and you could discuss boxing on the internet or read writing about boxing on the internet, and it started actually kicking up. Felix Trinidad was at the top of his game and very, very popular. And so there was a lot of shit about Felix Trinidad around that time. So a lot of people, that's just recent enough that a lot of people will remember,
Trinidad's the first fighter I can remember that people were actively saying that Sugar Ray Robinson would have got dusted by him in like 2 to 3 rounds. Like, people were such on that train of him, man. Like, oh my God, I hated it.
He was supposed to go through Hopkins straight to Roy Jones.
I trained with like the gym I used to go to had a lot of kids. I had a lot of Spanish kids I trained with, and they were massive Trinidad fans. I mean, I get it, but like, anytime I disagreed with them about him not being the number one greatest fighter that ever walked the planet, they would just get so pissed off at me.
Papa.
Like, and when Hopkins ended up finally beating him, I avoided them for a few days because they were acting like all the shit I was talking for a while. Yeah, but anyways, going back, Trinidad, man, when he first came on the scene, like you said, the Maurice Blocker fight, man, Trinidad was what, 20 years old in that fight? He was still a baby.
Yeah, he had that kind of like high top fade, like
he had the high top fade going on, which was funny because the way his head was shaped, so it just looked like a table.
Yeah, dude.
And then he had that little pencil thin mustache too.
Yeah,
it looked like he was still like kind of going through age.
It was like still developing.
Yeah, he was still developing, totally. But my God, he could punch, man. And there was like question marks about it because this is the pre-internet era. He's undefeated, and the hardcores know about him, but a lot of the general public don't. And when you see the way he blasted Blocker had already been knocked out a few times already. Like, he was kind of damaged goods.
Yeah, he's another fighter who always kind of looked a little old too, in my opinion. Like, he's just an old looking guy.
Another one, man, with the weird bald head, halo thing going on, all there in the face, tall, really, really lanky, but not in the same sense that you would think, oh, he must be a big power puncher, because he wasn't. Instead, he was an awkward boxer and a good fighter for his era. He beat Marlon Starling, beat a number of guys. But by the time Trinidad got to him, he had already been through a vicious war with Simon Brown, which he was on the losing end of. And Terry Norris, who was terrorizing people at that point in time in the early 90s, ravaged Blocker. And if you ever seen that fight, it's pretty bad, man. Blocker had no idea what the hell.
He took a couple thwackings, dude.
Yeah. Norris thumped him bad in that one. So that's what Trinidad was coming into. So I mean, Blocker might have been damaged goods, and Trinidad just, again, Blocker took was knocked unconscious, vicious knockout. Do you actually remember seeing that? Like, were you close to the ring to see that, or?
No, like we weren't that close. We were up in the stands and stuff like that. But I remember, I remember the result. Yeah,
yeah,
because
yeah.
that shit was
The crowd
memorable
going
because he
wild.
was face planted, bro. I was like 10, 11, and he was like,
Yeah, yeah,
face
yeah.
planted. And I remembered, but Terry Norris fought somebody on the undercard, and it was like, and that was what
And
everybody
Joe
was like.
Gotti, maybe.
Shit, god dang it! Nah, I can't remember. I should have looked at this. I should have been prepared. Yeah, it was Terry Norris and Troy Waters.
Okay.
And so everyone was all excited, or maybe that was the main event, but everybody was more excited for Terry Norris because he trained out in Campo, which is like no, not even a suburb. It's way the fuck out there. Campo's like almost, maybe it's different now, but Campo was the middle of nowhere when I was growing up. Like it was like the middle of the fucking desert. But that's where Terry Norris and Orland Norris trained, at this compound out in Campo. But they had either been in or around San Diego a whole bunch of times and for a number of years, and so they're fairly popular. And also, San Diego didn't have like a ton of Paul Vaden, like they didn't have a ton of fighters. But around this time, yeah, Paul Vaden, he was like a couple other fighters. But so anybody who was from San Diego, people were like, oh shit. So that's what everybody was all concerned about on that card. But I do remember the result, and that's exactly where kind of like the legend began or whatever. That's where everybody got their first glimpse, and that was when he started really turning it on in the division.
Oh my God, man. It was just a brutal knockout. So after he did that, people were just like excited, but still a little skeptical because they're like, oh, he's still young. I think he had already been dropped at this point too in a prior
And
fight before
he never looked like much. He wasn't
No,
very
he didn't. He looked like
muscular.
he was really easy to blow over. Like, all you needed was someone
Kind
just
of
to really,
slight. Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know if it was his first title defense or second or whatever. No, I think his first one might have been against Luis Garcia because he blasted the shit out of Garcia too. Garcia was
Yeah.
another contender, kind of an unknown, but he had given both Maurice Blocker and Meldrick Taylor fits in their fights, losing close decisions. So when Trinidad absolutely flattened him, people were like, "Oh, okay, that was impressive." But then he fights soon. He also fights. What's that guy? I'm not looking at his record.
Anthony Stevens.
Anthony Stevens.
Yeah.
Anthony Stevens at that point would end up becoming a respectable contender, but he was an unknown, nondescript dude with a spotty record. Someone that Trinidad should have blasted, and instead Trinidad gets dropped and goes life and death with him.
Yeah.
And that's when people were like, man, nah, he's just a kid. He's not ready for this, and yada, yada, yada. Don King's matchmaker said that if he matched him with Camacho, Camacho was going to murder him. Like this was the things that he was going through, but Trinidad slowly ended up developing himself that people were just like, oh my God, I need to see him against Delahoya. I need to see him against Whitaker. So.
Well, along the way too, like, I mean, he went to Camacho and chased Camacho around the ring for 12 rounds. Camacho was like, fuck this, dude. Like, yeah, he didn't want no part of that. And he won a fairly easy decision, but then he went in against Yori Boy Campus and gets knocked down, in that fight too. And obviously comes back and just fucking
and
almost.
That was the fight, I think, that turned a leaf for him with everybody. Cause the Camacho fight, like you said, that was a big win. But everybody knew Camacho again was already the runner that he was, and he didn't even really try to win. That wasn't that competitive.
Yeah, no, he was not even.
The Campus fight, because Campus was undefeated, known as a monster knockout artist. Had been featured on television.
He's 56-0.
Yeah, and a lot of people were excited about him, man. He had beaten the shit out of a lot of guys, and I think a lot of people were expecting Campus to knock out Trinidad as well. So when Campus landed that short left hook and Trinidad went down, a lot of people ringside and around, knowledgeable people were just kind of nodding silently to each other, like, okay, we know. But as you can say, man, what happened soon after that?
Well, Campus got caught up against the ropes and almost fucking decapitated, like just one of those really ugly stoppages where like a dude's head gets caught in like the wrong position, where like he was like, he got fucking brutalized. Anyway, yeah, but that was really, I think, in the next stretch of fights, dude, you could see, and I remember this being written about at the time, like you could drop Felix Trinidad, you could drop him, you could hurt him, you could hit him. It's just that when that happened, I mean, it's cliche or whatever, but it seemed to wake him up. Like it pissed him off. If you knocked him down, it was like, and also on top of that, he'd go to his corner and his dad be like, fucking smacking him in the fucking face and shit. And you'd be like, whoa, like his dad's hitting him harder than that fool over there. And, and then it would be like, he'd be like, oh, okay, I guess I need to go punch this guy. And he'd go fucking punch the shit out of him. So, I mean, there were a number of fighters who wound up dropping him. And some of the guys that dropped him, like, were not super great. It was just that he wound up getting up and brutalizing the shit out of him
it was the second round for whatever reason, man. Trinidad had a bad, like, he was always a slow starter. First round, he would barely do anything. He would just always just kind of analyze what was going on and just probe a little bit. Second round, he'd get clipped and get dropped. Don't ask me why, but it always kind of happened. I think Campus dropped him around the second round. Obakar, which was his next fight after the Campus fight, dropped him in the second round. Soon after that, he got dropped again in the second round. I think, what was it, Lushing or someone like that, Kevin Lushing. And I mean, like, but that was like you said, if he got woken up, all you had to do is drop him. All of a sudden, the gears turned on a little bit, and that was going to be your ass sooner or later, because that's when he was going to start churning out the heat. And once he started churning out the heat, eventually you were going to get brutalized and beat up, or you were straight up going to get cold cocked and concussed.
Yeah, and I mean, like, he went through, what was it? I want to say he made like either 15, 16 defenses or something like that of the IBF welterweight title. So I mean, the division at this point it wasn't an incredible division, it wasn't a great division, but it was a pretty solid division. And it seemed clear, though, because Oscar De La Hoya had been coming up in his own right. He dropped down to 130 to nab some, kind of bullshit title, but then, like, had gone up and seemed to grow pretty well into welterweight. And between them, they fought a pretty good spread of welterweights. Like, it was a decent welterweight division, not great, but pretty good. And so between them, they cleared it out, and it was clear that they needed to, like, man, they got to fight. Like, what the fuck? One's with Don King, one's with Top Rank. We get it, but, like, they got to fight. And this was just another kind of classic case, it seemed at first, that, like, they weren't going to fight because there were too many conflicting interests. And, I remember a lot at the time being written about that too. Like, oh, this is bullshit. This fight's got to be made and blah, blah, blah. And then they wound up coming together to make it. One of those fights where it was too big not to make, and etc. Felix Trinidad had gone through Pernell Whitaker. Pernell was pretty big at the time, obviously, but at the same time,
and that was the fight originally. Not to cut you off, but that was the fight originally that the world was clamoring for before De La Hoya had moved up to welterweight.
Well, and it makes sense too, because I mean, like, it would make sense that considering Pernell Whitaker's status and considering how great he was. But dude, it was just the wrong time in his career, dude. He was going through so much outside the ring shit. Yeah. And it was clear that he was in the twilight of his career. He was not a big welterweight whatsoever. And so going in against, Felix Trinidad, like, yeah, dude, he was never going to be destined to win that fight at that time. Some other version of Pernell Whitaker, sure. But at that time, man, that was bad. So yeah, I think that it was really anticlimactic compared to what people were hoping for and expecting.
People were demanding for Trinidad to have a big fight for a while, and that was Don King pulling some shenanigans. We almost got Trinidad Whitaker, or it looked like it was going to be on that way at least. In the late 1995, when they co-headlined on an HBO card. And Trinidad at that point had always been a Showtime fighter. So when he appeared on HBO to fight Larry Barnes and Whitaker fought Jake Rodriguez, people were like, oh shit, now there's time. I think we can finally make this fight and move it on. But nah, immediately afterwards, Trinidad was right back on Showtime, beating guys like Rodney Moore and Freddie Pendleton and Rudy Lovato and Kevin Lushing. Like, and people just like, really? What the hell? Now it looks like Trinidad's going to fight Terry Norris, though, right? This was like the super fight that people were excited about. Norris is with King, Trinidad's with King. It's an easy fight to make, and it looks like that fight's actually going to happen. I think Norris either bolted at that point to Bob Arum or something happened around that. Yeah, this was 97, so this is when Norris bolted to Arum for the De La Hoya fight, which he felt was going to be more lucrative. And now Trinidad's in limbo again, and he's just kind of like, what the fuck? So now he has to fight Troy Waters, which is a hell of a drop down from fighting Terry Norris at Madison Square Garden. So like you said, man, by the time he fights Whitaker, it's really anticlimactic because all the Whitaker's out of the ring issues. And Trinidad, who's been on the scene since '93, is his big fight that he's finally been begging for, demanding for, that the world's demanding for against Delahoya. It's been 6 years since he had since there's like been a mega fight, and they're like, this is the time to make it. And when that fight finally happens, Trinidad still can't get like that defining moment. Yes, he wins the fight, but it was so like controversy behind it, and Delahoya's performance, and Trinidad not looking amazing himself, and just being a letdown in general, that it like overshadowed everything.
Dude, one of the lasting memories for me is, and it might have been Legendary Nights that help cement this for me.
Yeah.
But the shot of Oscar De La Hoya walking through the hallway, and he's like, "Shit, I thought I won that."
And I've never really heard him say like curse before that. And then when you hear him, and it sounds so like
he's like, motherfucker.
Yeah.
Oh, gee.
Like stamping around like a kid who lost a super, like, bro, that was your fault. All right. That was your fault.
And then he always
Bill Clancy to tell you running around when your instincts that have told you to stand there, and you clearly were faster than him.
And you know what, dude? Like, he always had some. He had gone through so many trainers and always had some excuse or whatever. And I don't have any issue with Oscar's career or whatever. Like, I was never.
No, incredible resume.
But I mean, yeah, dude, there was always some thing or some excuse or some outside whatever. And so I don't want to fucking hear it, bro. But hey, dude, like he pulled it out to defeat Ike Quartey. Some people thought Ike should have won that fight. I thought that last round, or that last minute knockdown pulled it out for De La Hoya. Like, it was close as fuck, but he salvaged it kind of. He had defeated Julio Cesar Chavez. Ray Torres almost lost his life afterwards in the fucking process. We talked about that shit. No, but like I said, between Trinidad and De La Hoya, they'd basically cleaned out welterweight. So I mean, it made sense, but so fucking anticlimactic once that happened. But I mean, at the very least, though, what it did do was it kept Felix Trinidad's career momentum, though. Getting that win, and it was almost like once he moved up to 154, he beat the absolute shit out of David Reed. Poor David Reed, who had already, kind of been fast tracked and had his eye already like in terrible shape and whatnot. But like after that, it was like people didn't even care. Like, they didn't really care that the Oscar De La Hoya fight wasn't very good. He, Mamadou Thiam's eye. Is that guy, did he ever get his eyesight back? Man, that shit was awful.
Yeah.
And I mean, point being, 154 pounds, dude. Felix Trinidad looked absolutely phenomenal. So nobody gave a shit about
that was incredible. I don't think he was even more deadly than he was at welterweight, because at 154 he wasn't starving himself, at least not as much the way he was at welterweight, because people knew he was struggling with his weight there. And dude, man, he just, like, the Reed fight, I thought Reed was gonna win. I'll always admit it, man. I can say that I always like underestimated Trinidad in a lot of big fights, and he would pull them out. And in the Reed fight, I thought Reed had the tools. In the first few rounds, I was nodding to myself too. I'm like, yeah, man, look at Reed. He's too fast for him, yada, yada, yada. And then look what happens. Trinidad starts catching wind. He starts timing Reed. And then, like you said, it's one of the worst ass kickings you'll ever see televised. And poor Reed's career never recovered from that. That's when Trinidad started becoming a career altering. I
was just gonna say that was right around that, and then plus the Vargas fight was like, that was when people were like, oh, he's changing lives. Oh shit, and he was.
It was bad. I mean, Vargas, to his credit, somehow recovered from that first round, because most guys wouldn't have.
Ooh.
And
yeah, he clearly got like concussed in that first round.
Oh yeah. You see his face, man. He had no idea what the fuck's happening to him that day. Yeah, he just, eyes are rattling around. His head is probably scrambled to bits, dude. It was bad. He was cold. He came out really cold. And Trinidad, who, like we've said before, usually a slow starter for whatever reason, came out there and just blasted him. And, Vargas will never be compared to Willie Pep when it comes to defense. So he was just kind of right there for it. And man. And the train kept on rolling, though, for him, because now after he beats up Vargas and there's really nothing else to prove at junior middleweight, he ruined the two Olympians that were going to fight each other. He moves up to middleweight. And people are thinking now at this point, now this is when the talk is starting to happen because it's 2001. House of Boxing is out. These other boxing websites are out. The early message boards are out, and fans now are able to vent and explain, express their feelings of how much they love Trinidad and their other favorite fighters, mostly Trinidad. Roy Jones was getting a lot of attention too. Roy was getting a lot of attention.
That's true. Yeah.
Whenever Mike Tyson wasn't in trouble with the law, he had his followers as well, but he was always just kind of on the back burner. But Roy and Trinidad, man. But Trinidad was really building momentum. And a lot of people were starting to believe that if they ever fought, Trinidad was going to beat Roy Jones and then be anointed the greatest fighter that ever walked the planet. So when he fights William Joppy in Don King's middleweight tournament that he created for HBO around 2001, that was a big fight at MSG. And a lot of people consider it the best atmosphere that they've ever attended. Like we watched it. I mean, it looks absolutely incredible. But that was a fight again too, man. I watched Joppy, and I should have known better, man. Joppy wasn't a huge middleweight, kind of a short guy. And even though he had fast hands and everything, he wasn't like, spectacular in any way. He just was during an era that was.
He'd held a belt for a while.
He did, but it wasn't really a strong era.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. Like, yeah, and he also was like often like making defenses in like some fucking far-flung places against some fucking,
that are being featured against like, in a trilogy with Julio Cesar Green on Showtime, being
right,
or sharing a double header with Keith Holmes or something, right? So I should have known better, but I thought Joppy was going to beat Trinidad. Dumbass. And then again, man, Trinidad thrashes him and basically ruins Joppy's career. So all roads ahead to Bernard Hopkins.
Yeah, definitely one.
Which is the anniversary is about to come up with that fight.
That's true. That's coming up really soon. But like, fucking Joppy, dude, just one of the classic like talking shit and then getting wrecked like 10 seconds later type of clips. Because he's like, I don't remember. I don't even think you could see what he's saying because he's saying something to Trinidad. It's like he's saying "come on" or something like that because he's going, come on, that type of shit. And like 5 seconds later, Tito's just like pop, 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 and then he fucking gets knocked down. It's like, oh, buddy, oh man.
Joppy wasn't bad defensively. Like, I don't know what he decided to stay up there, and these guys think they could take Trinidad's punch, but I mean, like, and then Trinidad after that too. You remember that move he pulled, which was such a punk move to him? Where he just grabbed Joppy's face like grabbing a toddler, and he just went like that to him and just kind of pushed him to the ropes. I was like, oh, really?
For a while, there was a photo of that going around. I don't know if it's still around, but I remember on the message boards for a while, like people were posting photos of that because someone had caught the photo of him, like, and it looks like he's trying to like squeeze Joppy's head or something because Joppy's face is like, holy shit, and Trinidad's just like, like he's a small child or something. But man, bad decision, and he got absolutely fucking flattened in that one. But a lot of people, especially after that, thought that there was no way Bernard Hopkins was going to survive Felix Trinidad. And I remember twice, not only did Bernard Hopkins one time snatch the Puerto Rican flag and throw it down, he did that shit again
in Puerto Rico
and almost died. Like, I remember seeing on the news, they were like, watch the scene as boxer Bernard Hopkins throws, and there's like a stampede of people. They're like, fuck nah, bro. Like, he almost lost his fucking life that day. So he's lucky, but he obviously accomplished what he's trying to accomplish because, it made him the villain, and it made it so people were like, oh, Felix Trinidad's pumped now, But there was so much shit going on around that time, man. That was so weird. The fight was supposed to happen on September 11th weekend, and then September 11th, it was, I want to say it was like the 17th or some shit, and September 11th happened, and they obviously postponed it. But then when they postponed it, it was just weird, dude. So much stuff from around that time was so weird, bro. Like, even just if you watch that full broadcast, they're constantly mentioning it. They're constantly talking about like there's firefighters in the crowd, there's policemen in the crowd, there's this, there's that, there's the fucking American.
Referee for that fight, was it Smoger?
I think so, yeah.
Because I remember in the pre-fight thing, and I think Merchant called him out on this. he was like going on, guys, we got to remember what this means tonight. He was like giving some spiel about 9/11, and Merchant was like, is that even necessary?
There's like the American flag on fucking everything. You know, like
Yeah,
I think that even on the little ticker, like on the Chiron,
it was.
like there's the American flag down on the little ticker and shit. Anyway,
it was just one of those
it
things,
was
but at
weird.
the same time, it was totally weird. But I feel like since it was it might have, I'm not sure, it might have been the first major event after post 9/11, and definitely in New York in terms of like sports or whatever to take place. But
Yeah.
I think New York in particular, the country himself, whatever, was looking forward to something that just didn't involve what the tragedy that transpired. You know what I mean? And yeah, everything was really themed around what was going on, but I think everybody was just like happy to be like, hey, we can concentrate for a night on some other shit. And but yeah, man, Trinidad, it just with that fight, Hopkins was at his peak, even though people thought he might have been a little bit past it. Clearly he was. Bigger, he had a perfect game plan, could take what Trinidad could dish out. He bullied him around to show that he was the bigger, stronger man, and it was like a prolonged beating too. Like a Hopkins from the 95 or so probably would have tried to taken him out earlier. The Hopkins of 2001, who was much more, scientific and much more just kind of brutal in his approach too, man. When you think about it, he was much more sadistic in how he just like laid that out. He just kept on beating him, beating him, beating him. In Trinidad, who had finished so many careers earlier on, the guys that we just mentioned before that, who laid in his wake, his career had never recovered from this. Hopkins really beat the hell out of him, and not only was it a physical beating, mentally too, man, because like Trinidad hadn't lost at this point. This was a guy. Excuse me. This was a guy who disrespected him on his home turf, on his island, threw down his flag, talked shit the entire promotion, and then just beat him up and knocked him out when he couldn't do anything with him. And Trinidad's career never recovered from that. Yeah, he had that comeback soon after. He beat Tiam, well, not Tiam, poor Hassan Sharifi.
Yeah, another balding.
Yeah, another balding middleweight from
balding Frenchman.
Yeah. But aside from the excitement that he had when he came back and knocked out Ricardo Mayorga, that was basically the end of Trinidad's career.
And you know what, dude? I hadn't even thought to say this, but I will say it just because it's relevant to what we're talking about with the puncher conversation. But before the fight, so right before the fight, on fight night, Naseem Richardson, may he rest well,
Yes.
wound up being the person from Bernard Hopkins' camp, from his corner, who was watching Felix Trinidad get his hands wrapped. According to him, by the time he had gotten into the dressing room, one of Felix Trinidad's hands were already wrapped, and he was not there to watch it be wrapped, and so he demanded it be rewrapped. I'm not mixing this up with the Margarito thing, am I?
No.
Fuck, I don't think so. No, I'm pretty sure. No. Yeah, no, because that was what the delay was about.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because he was also the one who got the Margarito shit. But in any case,
extra padding, wasn't it?
that was, well, so what the whole thing was briefly that Felix Trinidad Sr., who by this time, obviously a very well-known trainer, he had actually used a method called stacking, which is where you alternate layers of tape and gauze on the knuckles. But it's also different in that I believe that you apply the tape directly to the skin.
Mm.
And so anyway, New York doesn't allow that. Nevada does or did at the time. And so it was kind of like depending on where you were, it was allowed or not allowed. And so it wasn't something nefarious per se. And in fact, the Nevada State Athletic Commission had adopted that style for the official, like, safest hand wrapping method. Okay. And they had actually flown Felix Trinidad Sr. in for to do a seminar and shit. Anyway, that's not that important. But so because of that, Felix Trinidad lost immediately after that. And a fairly well-known writer at the time, who was at Max Boxing, wrote an article titled Cheeto Trinidad ? And got Fernando Vargas, It was Fernando Vargas, and it was Joppy, and it was somebody else, but I can't remember who the third person was. And basically got quotes from them. And I'm not sure how these quotes were gotten. Like, I mean, but they almost seemed as if they were like the questions that being asked were leading questions, because they were saying shit like, fuck yeah, I always knew that his hands were, his wraps were loaded. I always knew that he loaded his gloves, he had blood, all this sorts of shit. Because the insinuation was that because Naseem Richardson had caught this error, that then this is how Felix Trinidad got all these knockouts the whole time. That he, that they had fucked with his hand wraps, and that it was, and Fernando Vargas was saying shit like it was like getting hit with concrete, and it was like getting hit with somebody who had like rocks in there, shit like that. And so I'm not even gonna fucking mention this writer's name because the guy's such a low life piece of shit. But I literally to this fucking day, bro, from the boxing history account, if I post shit about Felix Trinidad, people are like loaded wraps, and I'm like, and I'm just like, dude, wow, how persistent that shit has gone on. It's how long it's persisted is fucking awful. In any case, I'm not going to make a big thing out of it, but it sucks because, like I said, we're talking about it as like one of the greatest punchers, so it's relevant to that conversation. It just sucks that that's unfortunately where it goes to.
For sure, man. But regardless, I mean, that was just one of those things. Like you said, it was a miscommunication on how he wrapped hands. It wasn't outright cheating where you saw some plaster of Paris or some dumb shit being put on the wraps, or God forbid, Luis Resto, you have like actual
padding removed from the gloves.
Yeah. So Trinidad was just a great fighter, man. Very, very popular. The popularity that he had in Puerto Rico compared to others is unfathomable.
He's still beloved, yeah.
Still beloved. And I've talked to a lot of people, like, anyone that's from Puerto Rico that lives in New York, or male and female. I remember I was talking to these girls one time. They told me, I forgot what island they said they were from over there, but they said, they were like, oh, I just asked them, I was like, you follow boxing too much? They're like, oh, we know names, whatever. And I was like, what do you think about Cotto? Oh yeah, Cotto's cool. We like, he's kind of like, they just kind of whole hum about it.
Yeah.
And I said, what about Tito Trinidad? They both their faces lit up. Tito, oh man, everybody loves Tito. You serious? Everybody, you still love everybody. Oh, they got really excited. We all love Tito. Yeah, he's still beloved. Because they always felt Tito was always one of them. He would always go back and be celebrated. And you would see it after a win, after a big win, the way the whole place would just celebrate and go. Because he was one of them, and he would never shy away from the worst areas of the slums or wherever, anything like that. His people were his people, and he was proud to be amongst them, as opposed to other people who kind of keeps arm's length away, or their personalities didn't really translate into.
Yeah. Well, Miguel Cotto was always kind of like a little more quiet, a little more like pensive. He was
exactly.
And I mean, but it was almost always like some of the first words out of Felix Trinidad's mouth was some shit about being Puerto Rican, or loving Puerto Rico, or like Viva Puerto Rico or something, and the fans loved that shit, and he was really a man of the people. And yeah, I don't think they hated Miguel Cotto or anything. It's just they didn't love him the same way. They still don't, the way that Felix Trinidad just loved.
Totally. So yeah, man, that's a good call. I love talking about Trinidad, even in because we all, like you said, you can reminisce and think back on that time period, and we lived through it and know what was going on in boxing at that point and all that.
Hell yeah.
Cool. But to stay on the subject of Puerto Rico, I guess it's good to segue into another all-time great from that island. That would be Wilfredo Gomez.
Of course, dude. Bazooka.
Definitely, man. My opinion, the greatest junior featherweight of all time, and just easily one of the greatest punchers of all time. The guy was an absolute animal. And definitely another one who was featured a lot on network television and just TV in general, and a very popular fighter in the 70s and early 80s.
Unfortunately,
a low-weight fighter, man. As a low-weight fighter, it's pretty awesome.
Unfortunately, one that if he knocked you down, there was a pretty decent chance he was also going to punch you while you were down. He was another one of those fighters that did that shit a lot.
He was a very nasty guy too, man. He carried a chip on his shoulder. Wasn't the most polite dude in the ring, and
he was
kind of
mad.
Like in the same sense of like Roberto Duran.
Yeah,
very macho, and like took pleasure in just really beating the shit out of somebody and watched them suffer at his expense.
Roberto Duran's a good example, because just one of those fighters where like you're gonna have the fucking audacity to get up from that knockdown. You're gonna get up. All right.
Taunt the guy while he's down, beg him to get up, and then go up there and pummel him some more to beat him
Yeah,
down.
and then just beat his ass for getting up. It's like Jesus. Yes, a really sadistic and an incredible puncher too. Like you said, easily one of the best 122 pounders of all time, if not the best. But when it came to exiting the 122-pound division, just had the unfortunate, like we've talked about before, so many other fighters just came along at the wrong time, wrong era. But did what he could and was an incredible fighter, had some really great wins, but just kind of gets remembered for a couple of those losses, unfortunately. But dude, that run at 122 is badass.
I mean, his first pro fight, like he had a very storied amateur career. We talked about before in our earlier show, and we have to bring it up on this one as well. He lost to a Sugar Ray Leonard stablemate Derek Holmes, I think in the World Championships or whatever. He was knocked out. But other than that, I mean, Gomez had an outstanding amateur career. When he turned pro in '74, his first pro fight is a draw against a guy by the name of Jacinto Fuentes, if I'm saying his name right. And after that, though, that's when he has a perfect record from there up until the Salvador Sanchez fight, where he scored every one of his fights. And not only is it a perfect record of winning every single fight, he scores knockouts in all of them. And then not just like, whatever, like he's knocking the living shit out of dudes or just brutalizing them, including a rematch with Fuentes, who a few fights later, he avenges that draw with another knockout. So, moving on before he fights for his first world title, Gomez is fighting, not like absolute world beaters, but he's fighting good fighters himself too, with, the best name on his record with was perennial contender at the time and future world champion Alberto Davila, who he stopped. And from there, his first world title fight is in 1977 in Puerto Rico. He fights Dong Kyung Young, fighter from Korea, very tough guy. Gomez gets dropped early on. It's a back and forth war, but Gomez ends up stopping him. And that's when that reign of terror begins. His first defense in Royal Kobayashi, former champion from the past, good, really, really good fighter, and Gomez thrashes him, Juan Antonio Lopez is another name. You can just go through it if you go on BoxRec until we've talked about the Carlos Zarate fight, where that was the first one, two pure punchers. Zarate at that point, 52-0. Gomez undefeated, all of his wins by knockout himself, but Zarate is the proven commodity. And even though there's some factors going on in it, both guys struggled to make weight. Zarate was probably apparently was battling the flu, whatever it was. Gomez beat the shit out of that fight. That was just a absolute beat down thrashing. And the first time you really saw Gomez go over and start beating a guy while he was down, because Zarate was down clearly on all fours. So Gomez ran over, thumped him again, talked some shit to him, probably spit on him or whatever, and then got pulled away. And since they were in Puerto Rico, no one was going to do anything about it.
Yeah, no fucking way.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely not. Yeah, and on top of that, he had already by that point gone and made some defenses overseas. So yeah. I mean,
it was a junior featherweight division, and you're talking this is the late 70s at this point.
Yep.
How many guys? It's not like a lot of Americans are at 122. I mean, now there is, but like back then, fuck no, absolutely not. These divisions were still consisted of mostly foreigners. So yeah, Gomez was going to Japan. Gomez was going to Thailand for defenses. Totally.
Yeah, and it makes sense too, because like you said, the lower weight divisions, and even now, like there's some fight about getting some people interested in lower weight divisions, or if not interested, getting people to pay, getting people to in like networks, that is, getting people to actually pay decent money for these lower weight fighters. So yeah, it makes sense. But even so, point is, he went overseas and he had become, that's not something you'd see from a lot of champions these days necessarily. You'd probably be more likely to just hang out around home or whatever, if possible. But even so, yeah, very, very good fighter. But one of the things that starts to become also a theme is that because he's so hard charging, like the guy is one of those fighters that he has very good power, but he throws super hard, and he can get caught. He can walk straight into punches. And so that's the kind of thing that starts to happen throughout his career. Even though he's getting these knockouts, he's hittable. He can be hit. He can be knocked down, but he is a bear, dude. Like, you piss him off, he's a tough guy to hold
Kind
off.
of, if you want to compare him a little bit, similar and slightly in style to Edwin Valero. I don't think he was as wild as Valero became when Valero like really started, being featured on television or like getting his name really out there. But like if you watch them, especially like if you watch Valero like in sparring sessions early on, there's similarities there in terms of like their aggressiveness, their style, the way they overwhelm guys and everything too, and the way they are can be a little bit hittable. And the thing that's kind of maddening about that is that Gomez had ridiculous reflexes. He had great defense. When he didn't want to be hit, he wasn't hit. Like he really had good head movement, but sometimes, like you said, when he got caught up in those flurries and really started dropping bazookas on you, multiple punch combos, yeah, he would go right there and just kind of, you could catch him. Absolutely. But these poor guys at 122, they couldn't do anything with him. And Gomez was a big dude at that point. He was already having weight trouble before 1980 hit. It's kind of remarkable that he was able to last as long as he did at 122. Because if you go on BoxRec, you'll see it right there before I think his debut at MSG against Baba Jimenez. He has to shed 6 pounds, like you said, over there. In other fights, he has to shed pounds. Before he fights Nicky Perez in 1979. Nicky Perez is one of those guys who had a really built up, kind of strange record, built up in Arizona and, seedy areas of Vegas and other West Coast spots. He gets a fight with Gomez at MSG. And in the Ring Magazine article, when they were talking about that, before the fight, Gomez was pissed off. He was irritable. He had to make weight. He was struggling to make weight. Perez was talking shit to him beforehand, so Gomez was even more pissed off about that because he was, just an irritable guy to begin with. And then he brutalized the poor kid. And from there, I would have to say his most high-profile defense came in early 1980. Well, not early, in mid-1980, excuse me. And that was against the guy that I mentioned right before this, his old amateur nemesis, Derek Holmes.
Yep, wound up getting that revenge win over Derek Holmes, who, I mean, at this point, by this time, you obviously can't gauge some shit that happened years ago in the amateurs, and fighters develop at different rates and have different ceilings and stuff like that. And clearly Derek Holmes, who was a good fighter, nonetheless was just not, he was not up to this task at this point. And there's no shame in that because, like you said, at 122 pounds, dude, Gomez is easily one of the greatest ever, if not the greatest. And he had basically, cleaned out the fucking division. The division was, he'd fought anybody and everybody from any country or whatever. He didn't give a fuck. And so, that's one thing that you got to hand it to him, his team, Don King, whoever it was that was, taking on all comers. That made him a star in the division, but he might have stayed just a little bit too long and wore his body out. I don't know.
Also, too, he was a hard living guy. You know what I mean? The Holmes fight was just, that's one of the more brutal fights that was ever televised in the modern era. Joey Curtis was an idiot in that one. Gomez knocked down Holmes multiple times. Holmes suffered a fractured jaw, broken tooth, just a bad beating. Gomez was taunting him verbally every time he knocked him down, was going right up on him and talking shit to him. Like it's really, really bad.
He was like way too tough for his own good that night.
Yeah,
like
and he kept
on.
Ugly. And any other, it was bad to watch. But from there, soon enough, there was rumblings of Gomez challenging Danny Lopez in the late 70s. So this is where we're going with this. Finally, by 1981, the time is right. The super fight that everyone's been waiting for. Gomez fights Salvador Sanchez.
Yeah, Salvador Sanchez was obviously coming into his own around this time, had obviously, made a clear mark on the featherweight division and kind of was starting to carve out his own stardom, as it were. But Wilfredo Gomez had nowhere to go, dude. Like, I mean, not to say he was forced into the fight, but like you said, he was having a lot of trouble making weight for several fights in a row. But was still fighting in it. And he also had a couple of in-between fights too, above 122 pounds. I think a couple even above 126, where he just, didn't want to have to make that weight. And so he was already having trouble making weight. That's totally fair to mention. But on top of that, Salvador Sanchez, absolutely incredible fighter who had it all. He was a sharp puncher, had good punching power, not like super heavy punching power, but good power, knew when to turn it up, incredible footwork, good speed, skills, on motherfucking fleek. dude was an incredible fighter. And so Wilfredo Gomez he ran into the featherweight division at the wrong time. I mean, it wouldn't have been great running into Eusebio Pedrosa either, but he was in his own right is a great fighter. But Salvador Sanchez is the consensus, even in that short period of time, people call him the greatest Mexican fighter who ever lived, which is like, wow. I mean, not saying I agree or disagree. I'm just saying that's crazy. But also people say he's the greatest featherweight who ever lived. And he only had like a handful of title fights. So that's nuts, that's how good he looked. So Wilfredo
He was
Gomez,
a vicious puncher himself, who was reserved and quiet and usually is kind of kept to himself. Unlike Gomez, who was a loudmouth, abrasive, kind of a punk, and didn't shy from letting people know how he felt all the time and how much he was better than them. So of course he was going to ruffle Sanchez's feathers because he was talking throughout the press conference, throughout the press conferences and throughout the promotion about what he was going to do to Sanchez and how he was going to hurt him and how Puerto Ricans are better than Mexicans and all this other stuff, yada, 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 all this other stuff. You know what I mean? And so
and that's another element. Yeah. Is the Mexico versus Puerto Rico, the rivalry.
And considering Gomez is feeling like he has a chip on his shoulder, or if Zarate and thrashed him, he's thinking this is going to be easy pickings. Because I bet you he wasn't considering Sanchez to be in the class of Zarate. So
all that looks goofy. He's kind of goofy looking kid, kind of gangly looking.
And
he's quiet.
Popeye jaw, the giant afro, just weird. I mean, like you said too, he was still carving his niche, I guess, his history niche in the division. Like, yeah, he had beat the brakes off of Lopez twice, but he had struggled with who was the guy before he fought him? Ruben something.
Oh wow. Now I'm gonna have to look because I can't live with that. I can't live with that. No,
Ruben Castillo, excuse me. Yeah. Ruben Castillo, Pat Ford, Juan Laporte. He had struggled against Pat Ford. He struggled against Castillo a little bit, beat Laporte convincingly, but these fights were not going to convince Wilfredo Gomez to himself that he wasn't going to be able to beat Sanchez. You know what I mean? That's the bottom line of it.
Yeah, that's who I thought you were talking about at first was Patrick Ford because he had a pretty good back and forth. Like I think the style was really tough for him against Patrick Ford.
Ford was a really tall, gangly guy. It was just gonna be awkward for anybody. I mean, I know Pedrosa beat the shit out of him, but regardless, Sanchez dropped him in the first, broke his cheekbone because Gomez had notoriously had his facial structure was just bad. It always got really swollen, cut up, whatever. He got yoked up easily. And his faces enough started swelling up really, really bad, turned into slits. And I mean, he had his moments. It was a great fight, but Sanchez generally got the better of it and then viciously stopped him. And that wasn't the end of Gomez, but his career as being that, rampaging, just straight up bruiser was essentially over after that. The reign of terror he made at 130, he did at 122, was never going to be replicated. But don't get me wrong. I mean, he still
had a few in him.
Oh no, he totally did. Absolutely. Juan Meza would become a really, really good, tough contender and future champion, and Gomez whooped his ass pretty good. Juan Antonio Lopez, and then of course my personal favorite junior featherweight fight of all time, aside from Barrera Morales one, is his war with Lupe Pintor.
Oh, dude, yeah. I mean, there's a absolute banger first of all, but you brought up Juan Meza and I have to bring up the Jaime Garza fight, dude.
Oh my god, yeah, of course, that 1 round war, it's incredible.
I'm almost positive didn't Lee mention that in the Closet Classics, the Tales from the Vault? Yeah, because I'm pretty sure that I don't think I'd ever heard of the fight or had ever seen it, and I'm pretty sure where I'd first heard about it was he had written about it, and I was like, oh, I gotta check this out, and I'd finally seen it up on YouTube or something because I just never had a chance, or wherever I was, I saw it, and I was like, whoa, that's a fucking brutal first round fight. But anyway, yeah,
it's hilarious and it's funny to mention that fight between Mexican American and a Mexican fighter is taking place at a rec center under a Billy Costello title fight in Kingston, New York, of all places.
Yeah, it's wild, dude.
It's a really, really odd location for that fight, considering it should have been on the West Coast. But regardless, it is one of the wildest and best 1 round fights ever.
Yeah, closet classic. Shit happened in a closet.
Yes, yeah, literally, classic. Yeah, man. Well, the art rec room, yeah, where the kids do arts and crafts earlier on, then they're gonna have a title fight soon after.
Yeah, but you have a fucking raffle right after the fight or something like that.
Yeah. But Gomez still had some terror to pull in, like the Pintor fight, which took place on the undercard of Thomas Hearns, Wilfred Benitez on HBO.
Yeah, the Superdome.
Yeah, dude. Oh my God, one of the best fights you could ever watch, man. The back and forth. It looks like Gomez is gonna tear him up. Pintor, who is a longtime bantamweight champion at this point too, who had a a chip on his shoulder and something to prove, rallies back. Gomez's face starts swelling up because that's what they always did. It was a battle of attrition, and that's when it looked like Pintor was starting to finally pull through, and Gomez was wilting. Gomez pulled out one last rally and finally knocked him out. Incredible fight. One of the best title fights you will ever watch. And I asked Barry Tompkins about it, and he said he ranks it up there as the best fight he's ever seen in his life.
Oh, it's definitely up there, dude. And it's one of those fights where, it's one of those fights where, like, you talk about Corrales Castillo and all that type of stuff, and it's like, yeah, I'm with you. Like, I'm not saying it's a bad fight. I'm just saying that you got to take a second look at some of these other fights. I'm just saying before you start proclaiming. That's all. No, it's an incredible fight. It's a really, really good fight. Lupe Pintor himself was, an incredible puncher in his own right, and a very good fighter, and almost pulled this win off. And even in a kind of like, down sliding Wilfredo Gomez, like, would have been a hell of a win for him. So yeah, no, clearly though, the Wilfredo Gomez on the other side of the kind of outside the ring troubles, the weight issues, taking a pretty good beating from Salvador Sanchez. They don't have it up on the BoxRep page, but there's a great photo of Salvador Sanchez like in mid run.
Yes, yeah.
With Wilfredo Gomez like in a heap against the ropes.
Photo. Yep.
It's a great photo because it's just just the action shot is him. Like,
and there's another photo of them Gomez laying there after he gets dropped, and his face and mouth is open and agape, and his eyes closed, and he just looks in absolute pain and agony.
Yeah, because he's gotten his ass whooped by Salvador Sanchez. Understandable, but no, I mean he clearly took a pretty good whooping in that fight, and we've talked about it before, but that stuff doesn't happen in a vacuum. And that obviously affected his career, even though he had a nice, chunk of career after that. And he still came back, had the win over Juan Laporte. But then, Azuma Nelson, I would say pretty much, for the most part, put the nail in the coffin. Rocky Lockridge is not a bad win to get, but,
that was a bullshit win. He didn't win that fight.
Well, and first of all, he didn't really win the fight, but even so, Rocky Lockridge is not on the same level as a lot of these other fighters, so it's,
Gomez was clearly past it. And each time, and think about this, as great as a junior welterweight champion was, each time he became champion in a subsequent division, he would lose it in his first defense. Like, he becomes champion at featherweight, he fights
exactly.
Nelson, gets knocked out by Nelson. I mean, considering Nelson's career, that's not a big deal. But like you said,
especially 130, yeah.
When he fights Rocky Lockridge and scores that gift decision, his first title defense is against a nondescript foe named Alfredo Lane. And Lane never scored a big win before that fight. He would never score a big win after that fight.
Yeah, he basically made Alfredo Lane, on that night.
Yeah, he
with all due respect, Alfredo Lane.
Yes, rest in peace. He put Alfredo Lane in the history books that night. By getting knocked out.
Exactly.
So, yeah, man. And Gomez, like you said, he had a lot of out of the ring troubles. He had a lot of major drug issues, some other stuff going on with him, and gained a substantial amount of weight as well. So yeah, there was a lot of things, man. I know he was he had some health troubles as of late. I'm not sure how he's doing now or what's going on with him, but wish him the best of luck. And if anything, he definitely had to be mentioned on the show today. So that's why we brought him up.
No question. I mean, if we bring up one great Puerto Rican puncher, we got to bring up another one. They're the two between Felix Trinidad and Wilfredo Gomez. Incredible punchers from a beautiful island, needless to say. But let's see. Moving on, it's somebody, I won't bring him up because you had mentioned him. I'm going to leave that one free. However, we do have to talk about somebody who's on your arm, bro. Sonny Liston.
Yes, sir. You can't really see it, but yeah, Sonny.
Well, I mean, we talked about George Foreman, and when we talk about George Foreman, we'd mentioned Sonny Liston, and stuff like that. So I mean, like, there's some adjacent stuff that we've talked about, but Sonny Liston himself, like, he kind of gets lost in the shuffle because he had a somewhat short heavyweight reign. He's super famous, obviously, especially when you consider his heavyweight reign was just like wasn't very long. But just about any opponent that you could talk to said that he was a massive puncher. Well, apart from Muhammad Ali, because Muhammad Ali was just a cocky guy, dude. But just about anybody else, and George Foreman himself said that some of the sparring sessions he had with Sonny Liston was like Sonny Liston was the only fighter, the only one who's ever been able to go toe to toe with him in sparring and like give it back, like take his punches, but also give it back. And that he said that Sonny Liston was an incredible puncher. And on top of that, just like on like a scientific factual basis, go look at photos of Sonny Liston's hands. They're like gargantuan. They're like grotesquely large. They don't match like the rest of him. It's crazy. Seriously. Because it's like it doesn't sound that crazy until you see the photos. And it's like, I have a pretty big hand. And Sonny Liston's hand is like, fucking like 3 of mine. It's nuts.
Man, Liston was an anomaly. All right. We've talked about his past on past shows, where he's come from his past, where he had a very abusive father, a mom who died relatively young, and he was, he grew up with a guy who just used to beat the shit out of him. He grew up in the fields. And as a young kid, when he realized that this was not the life that was going to live, he went drifting away and soon caught himself into trouble early on. But as a person who really didn't really have any guidance, and a person who was as big as he was because he grew up quickly, he was already a big kid to begin with. And the type of work that he was doing, all that manual labor, he was just really strong as an ox individual to begin with. So wise guys out there who just saw a person with no direction, didn't really know where they was going, and no one really wanted to accept him anywhere. And they were like, oh, well, we can make him useful. Come with us. We'll be your family. And Liston kind of, fell into the wrong tracks for a bit. But we're talking about his career now, not so much, what's going on after that, man. Liston was an absolute beast when he first turned pro. In the mid 50s, in 1955, when he came through, the heavyweight division was still, it was an influx, man. There wasn't a lot going on over there. There was a lot of contenders, but they're all kind of middling. And yeah, there wasn't a dominant guy like a Mike Tyson that would come along in the 80s that would really just clear things up that things needed to be. And even then, this was more difficult because then by 1955, around the time Rocky Marciano was getting ready to retire, the division would just kind of go into haywire for a bit because the guy that would come into power, we talked about Floyd Patterson, his manager, Customato, would just make sure any contender that had a pulse wasn't going to get a title shot. So we had all these guys who were deserving who ended up having to fight each other and just kind of look through the driver's window. And you had a lot of guys who didn't deserve title shots getting title shots. And Sonny Liston had to go. He was a part of the former category, a guy that ended up being way too good. So he was not even going to sniff anywhere to a title until years later. And because of that, he had to fight a lot of tough guys on the come up. Early on his first year, he had to fight a contender, Johnny Summerlin, twice. And which already off the jump is just kind of like, are you fucking kidding me? You know what I mean? And then before his first loss, which is to another tough guy named Marty Marshall. Marty Marshall breaks his jaw, beats him up, and teaches Liston a few lessons along the way, which Liston learned well and ended up passing afterwards. Because soon after they have another rematch, Liston ends up knocking him out, and then they fight again for a third time, and Liston beats him up, basically solidifying his series with him. And it's after the Marshall fights. Now we're talking around 19, like we're getting a late 50s at this point, where even though Liston does have out of the ring troubles and things going on with him, he still is like, how do you put it, man? He's like, at the same time, when he's not dealing with out of the ring issues, he's beating the shit out of all the contenders out there of the era, including the ones that Customato was clearly avoiding.
Yeah, so Rocky Marciano fought Archie Moore in his last fight in 1955, and he got knocked down. He had a hell of a time against Archie Moore. a number of things had transpired outside the ring and inside the ring. Rocky Marciano had a nagging back injury and a couple other injuries, and then on top of that, he had basically figured out that one of his managers had been taking more of a cut than he had realized, and he didn't want to give his manager any more money, and so he decided to retire. It was a bunch of things. So in the wake of Rocky Marciano retiring, like you said, it was like there was a big hole in the division because there was a scrum, like there always is, to fill that heavyweight title vacancy. And Cus D'Amato was always accusing other fighters in their corner of having dealings with the mob, even when they didn't. And then also in retrospect, when it wound up being that Cus D'Amato had some fairly shady associations himself.
Yes.
So, I mean, like, that's often how it goes. Whoever's shouting the fucking loudest is the one, whoever's pointing their finger, it's like you got three fingers pointing back at you. So in any case, that kind of kept Sonny Liston basically scraping by and doing what he can. I remember seeing and hearing rumors for a number of years that Rocky Marciano avoided Sonny Liston, but that's like not even close to being true. Sonny Liston
wasn't considered for a title shot.
He wasn't even close to being ranked until about a year and a half, 2 years later, like after he retired. So it wasn't, the timing didn't match up. Like, could he have known about Sonny Liston? Yeah, I guess. But I mean, he was the heavyweight champ. Why the fuck would he be fighting Sonny Liston? It doesn't make any sense.
By the time Marciano was retiring, Liston was just finishing up his series with Marty Marshall.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense. Like, why would he? Yeah, let me stay not retired to fight this guy who's just fought a trilogy with Marty Marshall. Yeah. No, that's not how it works. So I mean, that doesn't fly. It's just that, yeah, clearly Sonny Liston though was a feared puncher, and he was a guy who around the late 50s had started absolutely, Wayne Bethy, Cleveland Williams and Nino Valdez was when it
took off.
Yeah, it was when right around the late 50s when it became clear that, like, all right, well, he had gotten his shit together enough that he was staying active in the ring, and that he was able to actually defeat a number of these ranked contenders, these guys who were on the kind of like top 15, top 12, and then into the top 10. And I mean, man, he treated Cleveland Williams rough. Yes. Real rough, dude. Poor Cleveland Williams.
And Cleveland Williams was the boogeyman in the division during that time too. A guy that was the monster puncher, was one of the main guys that Cus D'Amato heavily avoided. Yeah,
absolute physical specimen too.
Just shredded to the gills, and just a beast, an absolute beast who had only suffered a couple of losses, and a guy who definitely deserved a title shot years before that. And like you said, man, they were both brutal fights. Don't get me wrong. Williams did land some shots on him and bloody Liston's nose, but
I would imagine they both really disliked cops too.
Well, rightfully so, considering their histories with them. And consider this too, man. I think this was before Williams had his encounter with the police too, where he got shot, where he almost got killed by them.
I think the first fight, yeah, I believe.
So yeah, man, think about that. A pre-shot Cleveland Williams, who was an animal at that point, and Liston trounced him in 2 rounds. Like that was like, the boxing world is just kind of like, eh. And then you see Liston, you see how long he said his arms are, and you see the size of his fist, and you see the circumference of him. You see how scary he looks in general, because he never smiled and just looked like a menace. And you can see why Cus D'Amato becomes almost, I feel like, in Rocky 3, Mickey's inspiration is Cus D'Amato, where he's like, you see him in the audience just watching how Cus probably would be in the back with the binoculars and watching watching
like the opera glasses. He's like,
totally, yeah, man, watching him just like, fucking thump around Burt Whitehurst or something like that. And then you see Cus just go, oh.
Not tonight, Rock, not this one.
It ain't gonna happen there, Floyd. We ain't doing it. Cus, I want to fight him. You're not gonna fight him, not on my watch. And soon at like Cleveland Williams, Nino Valdez, Zora Foley, these were all guys that were deserving of title shots. And then they ran into Sonny Liston, and Sonny Liston proved that he was the head commodity of all these guys. He just beat the shit out of them. The only one out of that group that was able to last the distance was Eddie Machen. And Eddie Machen was a really solid fighter himself and a good boxer who had enough defense to be able to handle himself to do that. And Machen got his ass kicked that whole fight too. It wasn't like it was competitive. So yeah, man, but Liston was blackballed. By the time he finally got his title shot against Patterson in 1962, Liston's best days were probably already past him.
Yep.
But
straight up.
It didn't matter though.
He did Floyd Patterson's work for him, dude. That entire stretch for like, I don't know, whatever it was, like a year and a half before he fought Floyd Patterson.
Yes, totally.
He cleaned out the division. He did all Floyd Patterson's work for him. Meanwhile, Floyd Patterson's, like the best guys he's got is like Cowboy Harris and Hurricane Jackson, Pete Rodemaker. He's fighting all these dudes who don't really deserve shots at the heavyweight title, or just, basically the best they got is like they're these like characters. You know what I mean? Like they're like funny characters. They're not really good fighters. It's just like a good story. Pete Rodemaker, won the gold. So like, let's give him a shot at the heavyweight title in his debut fight. Isn't that a great story? It's a great story, but it's not a great fight. And so, but even so, Floyd Patterson's getting knocked down in these kinds of fights. And so there was a lot of talk. People aren't stupid. People are able to see this. And a lot of people in the media were calling it out and saying like, Customato clearly does not want his fighter anywhere near this guy or anywhere near this guy. He's not going to put him in with this guy. And so then Customato would say that rider's fucking getting paid by the mob. He's clearly getting paid by so-and-so. And so it was just, it was an endless cycle of this kind of shit. But Sonny Liston totally cleaned out the division for him. I mean, dude, Roy Harris, he totally disposed of Roy Harris, as he should have. But Roy Harris was a fun character, like I said, in his own right. And had a funny
cut and shoot.
Yeah, from Cut and Shoot, Texas. Had a funny story, had a good spread before the Patterson fight in Sports Illustrated that you should go read if you haven't. But
Hurricane Jackson was completely off the wall. Liston never fought him, but I mean, these are just the characters you're talking about.
Yeah, just these like, what? Where did you get this guy from? But then one of a handful of fights in a row culminated by Albert Westfall, who was not a very good fighter, but was a big guy, a visible guy. And also on top of that, the fight happened on TV. It happened on, I'm pretty sure, NBC. And so, Sonny Liston goes in there and absolutely shit kicks Albert Westfall, slumps him, puts him to sleep. Like, even now, it's a brutal knockout. Just like, it almost looks like Albert Westfall is like just standing there waiting for it. Like, it's like he doesn't even move, and Liston's just like and fucking that's it. And the dude's slumped.
He's just kind of like, please don't hurt me, please don't hurt me, just make this end it, just make it quick, man, please, God. Oh God, okay.
But it happened on national TV, and the dude winds up just absolutely unconscious and asleep on national TV. So I think that it just got to a point where you can't ignore him anymore. Like, he's putting fools to sleep.
Didn't want to fight him. I think Patterson even wanted to fight him before 62. But again, Cuss didn't let him do that. He made sure he didn't let him do that. And by the time Patterson finally got rid of Customato, that's when he was like, all right, I'm going to fight, I'll fight Liston. And everybody knew that Liston deserved it. But like, again, America was blackballing him. And America, especially conservative America, were still kind of like in the Eisenhower era of, moving in the early 60s. They don't want a guy like that representing the heavyweight champion, the person that would like represent, the country as being the man. Patterson was cool. Patterson was respectful. Everybody liked him. He was,
he didn't get in trouble. He was soft-spoken.
Very soft-spoken, all that. Liston had a bad background, definitely had mob ties. Wasn't a guy that Cuss was just trying to, yell about. And clearly wasn't very surly, not friendly.
I'm sure he scared white America.
Completely did. Didn't the Kennedys even like reach out? One of them, Robert Kennedy or JFK, or one of them reach out to Patterson personally? Was like, please don't fight him.
I remember hearing something about that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I mean, Patterson, good person that he is, went out there, fought him, got knocked out twice. It is what it is. But again, man, Liston was done by this point. Even if Liston was in his prime, I suspect that he wasn't going to ever able to do a thing with Muhammad Ali. As big as Liston was, he was too short to ever really handle that. He was a tiny guy, and just the style he was just going to play.
He was very deliberate. He wasn't bad skill wise at all, and he had a really good jab. Like a fucking that jab would take your motherfucking head off. But he was very deliberate, and he was not. He didn't have like much of a soft touch, and by that I mean like Muhammad Ali did. Muhammad Ali knew how to, pop, 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 that type of shit. And that wasn't Liston. Liston was more like, like that Foreman kind of like thunk, thunk, like put a lot into his punches style.
If you watch the first fight, you see how he's chasing Ali with the jab and like following forward a little bit.
Yeah, and he was walking into a lot of what Ali was just kind of serving him up. He didn't have a tough time, and who knows all the extracurricular shit that went on in that fight. Who fucking knows, with all these eyes and everything. But just in terms of skill, he was having a hell of a time that night. And I don't know that he would ever, he would have never had an easy time with Muhammad Ali. And I don't know if he would have ever beaten him ever. But then in the second fight, again, there's so many shenanigans and potential shenanigans in these fights that it's really tough to know. But I think that we can be pretty certain that Muhammad Ali, he defeated him twice. But Sonny Liston's reputation took such a hit after that second fight, and for a number of reasons too. Everybody was questioning, why did that fight happen in Lewiston, Maine? Why? Because it was there's so many issues and postponements and stuff like that it wound up going to Lewiston, and nobody wanted to be there. It was not very well attended, et cetera, et cetera. And then on top of that, it winds up ending with a first round KO. It's officiated super poorly. Nobody likes Muhammad Ali, et cetera. So it's like, Sonny, you fucked us over, bro. That type of mentality. Nobody wanted Sonny Liston at this time. And he was, I guess, to his credit, he did try to kind of get himself back into the good graces of at least boxing by coming back into the division and defeating a handful of, decent fighters that were two of them that were at least ranked. But yeah, by this point, like you said, dude, who knows? We don't even know exactly how old he was. He might not even know exactly how old he was.
And he just settled on a number.
And he was past it. He was past his best. And he also had a style where he wasn't going to be doing himself any favors. His defense wasn't great, etc. And so by the time, he had reached the end of his career, he'd obviously still had his power, but was slow as molasses.
He really was, man. And, he was a relic from the past too. You know what I mean? The guy that from the late 50s into the 60s, and he wasn't taking care of himself either. Like, there's been all kinds of rumblings over the years, especially after he had his premature death, about his out of the ring issues. Sonny Liston was such a private guy that no one really knew what he was up to out of the ring unless you personally knew him. But everybody kind of knew too that it probably wasn't just him sitting at home reading the newspaper. You know what I mean? So it's like after he passed away, you started hearing rumblings. Oh, Liston was addicted to heroin. Liston was addicted to alcohol. He was always, the guy was always constantly just drinking vodka and orange juice or just straight up vodka. He was high as a kite every single day. He definitely smoked weed. He did all kinds of other stuff. So clearly he wasn't taking care of himself as well as, continuing with his career as an older guy at an age that we're not even really sure of. He could have been in his mid 40s for all we know. And, but he was still plugging along. You know what I mean? He wasn't beating like the top shelf contenders of the era, but he was staying active and he was staying, well, and he was winning enough that like he was always on the cusp of a potential big fight. His name was always in the mix. There was talks about him fighting Jerry Corey. There was talks about him fighting for the WBA title. There was talks about him fighting for this one or that one. Joe Frazier potentially when he was on the rise. Like there was always, his name was always in the mix for various things. But
at one point they even tried to match Bonavena against him.
That's right. Yeah. Oh yeah. And the problem, unfortunately, everything kind of came to a screeching halt with him in 1969 when he was knocked out by Otis Martin.
Oh man, that's basically
and that was a vicious knockout.
Yeah, he did to Sonny Liston what Sonny Liston did to Albert Westfall, where it's like it's almost like the fighter getting knocked out is like frozen up, and totally. Like it's like they can't react. And Leotis Martin, like I think it's a right hand, but it's a single shot, like kind of puts him down, and he just like boom, it's brutal and it sucks, and he's all bloodied up and fucked up, dude. Like he looks like shit.
And he was winning that fight. He was beating Martin up, man. I mean, Martin was a good fighter, a very heavy-handed fighter himself, who did make Ring's top 100 list, but he was clearly a rung below the very best of the division. And when he knocked out Liston, that basically ended Liston as having any type of chance of doing anything. But he still had one more fight after that. 6 months later, he comes back and he fights Chuck Wepner. Chuck Wepner,
Bayonne bleeder,
a favorite of everybody. Obviously, the Rocky story, yada yada yada. But yeah, he's a bleeder for a reason. A guy that was a punching bag for everyone in the division. Kind of incredible. He still got a title shot in 1976, considering he was getting his ass kicked against Sonny Liston in 1970. And in Liston's last professional fight, man, you know, there's really grainy footage of it on YouTube. There's nothing like I've never seen clear footage of it, but you can tell that Liston just kind of beats the crap out of him. Wepner's bigger than him, you know, taller, because I said Liston wasn't the tallest guy, but Liston just brutalized him. And after the fight, you know, Wepner's face a bloody mask, everything like that. And they ask Liston afterwards, they say, was that the bravest guy you ever fought? And he said, no, his manager is. Something to the effect of that, yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, and not too much longer after that, you know, Sonny Liston was, well, his body basically was found, and it wasn't 100% exactly when and how he died. But I remember on a couple of different like documentaries or specials or whatever, people saying, you know, they say that he died from a heroin overdose or something like that, but he was scared to death of needles. And I can't. You must not know what the fuck a drug addict is, bro.
Yeah.
A drug addict ain't scared of needles. But but I get it though. You know, you don't want to believe somebody like that would do something like that. I understand. But
I mean,
but yeah,
like there's always been, especially with all the books speculating on what happened.
exactly. There's so much mystery.
Ones making it like a true crime thing. Oh, someone killed Sonny. Blah, blah, blah. At the end of the day, I think we bring him up along the show, but like what he wrote in Sporting Blood, Carlos Acevedo, I think is the closest one, because I agree with it, and it makes the most sense. He took a hot shot from somebody that, whether that guy wanted him dead or not, but Liston got some bad stuff, or it was too strong for him, and it just took him out. You know,
this shit, I mean, I'm not trivializing it, but it happens every day.
Every day.
Drug addicts overdose all the time, and they know what they're doing and take drugs all the time. It's when you get fucking street drugs and shit, it's like how it goes, you know?
And apparently it was probably something from the famous jazz trumpet player Red Rodney, or if it was not, maybe from some other dealer around the time, because there's a lot of sketchy people Liston was dealing with. But yeah, whether it was an intentional hot shot or someone just gave him some stuff that Liston just kind of took and it was too much, whatever it was, I think that's what it was. That's just my opinion. I don't think anyone was going to go in there. No one was going to physically tie up Sonny Liston and shoot him with drugs or something like that. No human on the planet was going to do that to him.
Right? I don't think so. Yeah, he'd have to be really incapacitated.
Who was going to go into Liston's home and try to do that to him? He'd kill anybody. So, and they all knew it too. The only way if someone was going to take him out, the only way to do is to give him something that he wouldn't even be suspecting. Well,
and he was generally armed too. Yeah. So it's like, it wasn't, we're not dealing with, I don't think so.
I mean, that's a whole other thing. But for my last ones, I guess we'll keep with the Foreman connection for this too. It's going to be a two-piecer. It's two guys that were a part of his circle and two guys that were his trainers. And that would be two of the top 5 greatest punchers of all time, Archie Moore and Sandy Sadler. Nice.
Yeah, dude, get the twofer. Fuck yeah.
Absolutely.
Can you imagine though, having to, I can't even, I'm gonna have to, well,
what's that?
I'm just thinking, like, I'm trying to like add up how many fucking knockouts they have between them, but that's amazing, you know. Sandy Sadler, Archie Moore, and George Foreman. That's like just that right there. That's like 3 of the top 10 greatest punchers of all time. So that's incredible.
Over 200, probably close to 3 or so. No.
Wow. Anyway, that's nuts. But yeah, dude, Sandy Sadler is one of those fighters who, like we've talked about before, had just the stature, had the musculature, body type, whatever, tall, gangly, you know, didn't really look like much. If you probably saw him on the street, you'd see him in like one of those fucking old suits from like the 1940s or 50s. He's like, you know, looks like nothing. And then he knocks your absolute block off. The guy was, and on top of that, like we've also talked about with some other fighters, he was a mean bastard. He was a dirty dude in the ring.
Nastiest fighters of all time. Man.
Yeah, and he can punch. Oof, dude, that's rough.
And he could take a punch. All right. You know, because a lot of tall, like lanky guys, if you can get in on their ass a little bit, you can hurt them and somehow maybe fold them or whatever, right? Because they don't take the best punch or hit him body wise. That wasn't Sandy Sadler, all right? Sadler came up in the 40s and 50s, and not only was he tall, like you said, a monster puncher, mean as hell, would foul the shit out of you too if necessary. He had one of the all-time great chins. All right, he was only knocked out in the second or third, I think in the second pro fight or something like that, and he was never stopped again after that. All right, in over 100 and close to 160 pro fights or so, he was only stopped once in his career. So yeah, you had all that to deal with. You weren't going to hurt him.
I mean, well, and he fought a literal who's who between featherweight and lightweight too, because he's remembered as he was a big light or a big featherweight is the thing.
He was a junior lightweight champion as well, though.
Yeah, he's remembered as a featherweight, of course, because of his great trilogy, or no, I'm sorry, I think it was 4 fights with Willie Pep. But well, I should rephrase that. It wasn't so much great as it was classic, I think, because 2 of the fights were absolute shit fests, I think. But partially because he was a dude who was like kind of a win by any means kind of fighter. Yes. And he'd use his forearms, elbows, and I mean, I brought this up before, but I think it was the 3rd Willie Pep fight, either the 3rd or the 4th, where it was so foul filled that it literally, they started implementing new rules and shit like that. And
they both got suspended.
Yeah, suspended, and their suspensions were adopted by other states who were like, fuck that, dude. So, I mean, in any case, that's the point, is that Sandy Sadler was just somebody who was coming after your ass, dude. He was coming after you from 126 pounds to 135, and he was a big featherweight. And from between those weights, Orlando Zulueta, Old Bones, Joe Brown, Jimmy Carter, fucking Willie Pep. Gosh, dude, pretty much everybody from 126 to 130 that was ranked at the time he fought. Patty DeMarco, Harold Dade. Yeah, I mean, dude, it's literally, you just go down and it's a laundry list.
Yeah, you just mentioned so many guys, dude. And he got the better of almost all of them. You know what I mean? Sure, he could be outboxed and he would lose certain fights, and some of the fights he'd lose is because he would lose rounds to fouling. You know what I mean? Because again, the guy he had no problem hitting you behind the head. He had no problem lacing you. He had no problem elbowing you. He had no problem hitting you low blow. He had no problem kneeing you. He had no problem headbutting you, kidney punching you. You name it, he would do it. And he's one of those old school guys who could be crafty about it, but at the same time, he kind of didn't give a shit either, because he was so nasty that if he felt that you fouled him, which even if you didn't, like, you know what I mean, you just had him with a punch that kind of irritated him and like maybe slightly, bothered him, whatever it was, he was going to retaliate with something that was going to bother you. He'd get you in there, and since he was bigger than you and probably stronger than you, he would bully you up into a clinch, and then he would just do something to you. All of a sudden, you'd be blind in one eye, or sliced or something. You look at the referee and be like, bro, what the fuck? Are you kidding me right now? And then Sadler would hit you with 3 more punches, and you're laid there unconscious and bloodied at the same time. Awful to fight, like an absolute nightmare.
Flash Elorde, one of the most beloved Filipino fighters of all time, and even now, the Elorde family in the Philippines. I think that I don't know if he's still active, but 2 or 3 years ago, there were like Flash Elorde's like great grand nephews or something like that were all pro fighters and active and whatnot. But in any case, he had the audacity to take a decision over Sandy Sadler in the Philippines, and so then they rematched, and this is toward the very tail end of Sandy Sadler's career. But man, he thrashed Flash Elorde so bad that they stopped the fight on cuts. But it's like, there's photos of it, and go look at the photos, and there's fairly like close-up photos of Flash Elorde's face, dude. That poor man. Poor man.
And his you can tell some of those cuts are not made from punches.
No, they sure don't look like it, dude. Because it's like, you get I don't know, man. I'm not trying to say I'm like some cut expert, but it's like a lot of those cuts from punches, it's like they're like jagged nor crazy looking cuts. And you get a punch cut from like a headbutt, and that's like a straight, just like slice, not all the time, but it sure seems that way. And man, Elorde's like, his lips are all messed up, his eyes like, ugh. Dude, if you fight Sandy Sadler, you're gonna come out looking rough.
Very much so. And Sadler was one of those dual champions where he held titles in 2 divisions at the same time. Never hear of that today. But back then it was slightly more. I get, it wasn't very common back then either, but it was more common obviously now because the junior divisions weren't really taken as seriously. Like if
Yeah,
you became a junior lightweight champion, you could hold that belt, and yeah, you defended it here and there, but that was more or less because, like, if you felt like making 126 or not. Sadler was the
exactly.
recognized featherweight champion. Um, that was the title obviously that held all the prestige, and when you look at the levels of Willie Pep and Orlando Zuleta, who he beat for the junior welterweight for the junior lightweight belt. Clearly, featherweight is holding the class there. But I mean, he did hold on to the junior lightweight title for a minute and did make defenses of it. One fight I would love to see is his riot that happened with Diego Sosa. I don't know if there's footage of that happened in Cuba,
Oh,
where they
I've
both
never
went.
seen it, but
Yeah, I
doesn't mean
know.
it's not
But
there.
like, yeah, they that was kind of like they both started fouling each other early on. Then they both went down at the same time. Referee started counting down. Sadler got up first, and so counted out Sosa. And then the crowd rioted because they're in Cuba and they thought that Sadler fouled Sosa, and hence why he couldn't get up. But
Probably did foul him.
yeah. So things like that, you know what I mean? But I mean, just a really, as nasty as he was and everything, he was a great fighter, and his career would have continued if he didn't have a car accident. He was in a cab, I believe it was, and the cab driver got into a bad car accident that Sadler suffered a really bad eye injury, and he was forced to retire because of that. Sadler, I mean, like you said, by the time he retired, it was around 1956 or so. He had a long ass career.
Yeah, he had like
So I can only
160
assume,
fights or something.
totally. So you can only assume that by that point he would only maybe last a few more years, maybe up until like 1960 or so before his career would end. But I mean, he was still champion. He was forced to retire as still champion.
Well, and he had also served time in the U.S. Army.
Yeah.
I mean, a handful of years before that, and I mean, it's almost unfair to be honest, dude. Because like, don't get me wrong, I have nothing against Willie Pep whatsoever, but it's like, dude, Sandy Sadler beat his ass. I mean, I'm not trying to be a dick, but people are like, oh, Willie Pep is going to be like top 5 all time, and I'm like, I'm not saying he's not. I'm just saying that Sandy Sadler whooped his ass pretty good. So I mean, where does he rank? But
And that's cool that they became friends too, because they became friends afterwards in their career. And if you listen to them, there was an interview. Well, they were interviewed a lot, but like Sadler became a staple at the Hall of Fame, at least in its early years. And Pep was there for a number of years himself. And I think it was the first year, 1990 or so, where Sadler went up to make a speech, and he was struggling at that point. Sadler suffered from a number of health issues after his career ended. He did help train George Foreman, so I mean, the '70s he was still active and everything. But I think it was like by the '80s he started slowing down. So like by 1990, he had definitely slowed down a lot. Like his brain is slowed down, his eye issues, everything else, and onset of dementia. And so he was on stage to make a speech, and he was clearly struggling. And Willie Pep just kind of ran up there and helped him. Just started improvising with him, and kind of took over. The
Willie Pep was pretty sharp
he
for
was for a
like
long time up
yeah,
until like a sharp decline in the late '90s. But
yeah.
he was really sharp by that point, so he kind of took over he kind of took over the dais and like played along with Sadler to make sure he included him, and it was fun. You know what I mean? Like they were talking, Pep was talking about how much he whipped his ass and all this other stuff, and then Pep asked Sadler, he was like, oh man, Sadler, who would talk about? He was like, talk about some of your toughest fights, huh? And Sadler kind of, he was like, well, you were pretty good. And then crowd cheered at that, and then they talked a little bit more. But yeah, so
Yeah, I mean, definitely an incredible puncher, guy who carried his power up. I mean, he didn't go too far, but also at the same time, there wasn't as much emphasis put on going through division after division and winning
no, if
championships.
you were just a long time champion, he was recognized as one of the baddest men of the '50s.
Well, and
Totally.
if you can make the weight, then
Yeah.
why do you have to move? Yeah, but that's just
And,
different time.
and to know how tough of a fighter he was, Willie Pep, they always, of course, because this is boxing, his greatest performance is the one that was never filmed. The second fight was Sandy Sadler.
Yep.
And they always say that was the best performance. And Pep always said that he put all of his tools, all of his tricks, everything he ever learned into that second fight. and he's bedazzled Sadler. I mean, like there's that photo where Sadler looks kind of weary, leaning back, and you see Pep with both of his hands ready to about to pounce on him, you know. And even through all that, they still say that Sadler started rallying in the middle rounds after just getting whooped on early on by Pep and his speed. But he started rallying, and by the late rounds, Pep looked like an absolute mess, and that he could drop at any moment, and that he barely hung on at round 15. Like he had banked enough rounds that he won the fight clearly, but by the end of the fight, it looked like he was just either mugged or run over or both.
Well, and they've been, you know, they've been talked about as part of the greatest rivalry in boxing since I've become a fan. You know, I've heard about,
of course, yeah,
and partially too because it's like Pep. You know, it's like a funny sounding name. You know, like you read that name and you remember it. So it's I remember from way back reading about them. So no, that's a good call. That's definitely a good call with Sandy Sadler and Archie Moore too.
But yeah, so to segue that to Archie, who was the complete opposite of Sandy Sadler in terms of just not being an angry, brooding, you know, or more by all accounts. I've never had the chance to meet him. Unfortunately, I just missed him. But besides being the holding the all-time record for knockouts, is just seemed like the nicest, most insightful guy. Like he loved jazz music. There's photos of him with Lucky Thompson and other musicians of the time, and just seemed like a general, easygoing, really lighthearted guy. But his profession was knocking the shit out of dudes, which he was very good at. You know.
Yeah, just an incredibly skilled dude too.
Totally,
I mean, tons
totally.
of knockouts, and obviously, I mean, you can't get that many knockouts if you're not a good knockout puncher. But um, an incredible stylist too. He was a boxer puncher. He wasn't just a pure puncher. You know, he was a boxer puncher for sure, with emphasis on the boxer. And also on top of that, he was a very good middleweight. He's remembered as a light heavyweight, and primarily that's where he had most of his fights. And he also went up to heavyweight too, but he was a very good middleweight. But I mean, it's just that. I mean, the guy's stylish, bro. You look at the photos of him back in the day, especially with his hair slicked back, and then he's got the mustache and then just the soul patch. Like that was his fucking steez, dude. The mustache and the soul patch. Like the dude looked fucking slick. But yeah, an absolute incredible puncher and a guy who knew how to set up those punches too, for sure. And thankfully, there's plenty of pretty decent footage of him on YouTube and that's around.
He
So you
had
can,
such a long career. You
yeah, he
know,
was around for a long time, dude.
people forget. You know, some people forget he was a part of Black Murderers Row back in the day.
Part of Black Murders Row, and then 25 years later fought Muhammad. No, not that long. 20 years later fought Muhammad Ali.
a young cat. Yeah, totally. Like, and that wasn't even his last fight. You know what I mean? When you think about it, it still wasn't as old as he looked in that fight. I remember watching it as a kid, and I was like, he looks like an old grandpa, because I didn't know who Archie Moore was when I was a kid. You know what I mean? And the first VHS tape I watched of Ali,
Like
the
old
VHS,
mongoose. That's an
he
old
looked old.
mongoose
He
for
looked
sure.
very old. You can tell he's gray in the video. His body looks old, and he doesn't put up much resistance to Ali. Like Ali just kind of does what he wants, and you see Moore just slowly creep to the canvas. I was like, how old is this guy? What is that, great champion? The fuck? But no, man. You know, Archie Moore turned pro in 1935. 1935. His first pro fight was against a guy named Piano Man Jones. Okay.
Dude, that fool turned pro during the Great Depression, and then by the
Yes,
time he retired, they were talking about people
the
having
Beatles were out.
depression.
By the time he retired, the Beatles were number one. All right. In 1935, Louis Armstrong was probably number one. So,
It's fucking wild.
or Benny Goodman, whatever was popping in the big band era. So like, so by the time Archie Moore, what makes his career so remarkable, by the time Archie Moore finally gets a title shot against Joey Maxim, he had already had like 2 careers at that point. Most people would have been long done with their career. Moore would have been another charter member of Black Murderers Row, one of those guys who never got a title shot from that era. Had things going according to plan, because that's how most people in the establishment wanted it to be for him. But he suffered losses early on. One of his earlier losses was to Teddy Yarrow, wasn't it, right? The light
Yeah.
heavyweight champion, yeah. Who, great fighter. Not talked about enough today, but just an excellent stylist and probably taught Moore a thing or two in that fight. You know, he had to go through guys like the Hogue twins, Big Boy and Shorty, the brothers, and every other guy from that era that he had to go through, like Coco Kid, Eddie Booker, excuse me, you know, you name him. What's his name? The one that everybody, the consensus, Charlie Burley.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Jimmy Bivens, Ezra Charles, like like who's who back then, you know what I mean? Of all these guys, and fight them often too. Like,
and this is even before his greatness is recognized. Before, I mean, his very goodness is recognized, you know.
Totally. Way
and
before
so
that.
what
because it's hard to really like branch yourself out to be the head of a pack when the talent is so good in the group that you have to fight. You know what I mean? You're trading wins and losses.
You have no choice.
Exactly.
That's such bullshit. But I mean, dude, what gets me is that his war with Yvonne Durrell, and it's like every time I look this up, I'm just like, that should happen in 1958.
Yes.
Like, because I don't know why, but in my mind, I'm just like, yeah, that should happen in like 40 something. But then I see it and I'm just like, it's almost 1960. Holy shit. And he, by that time, was like 38 or something like that. He was like fucking
older,
old, bro. He might have been older.
Yeah, absolutely his 40s for sure.
And I mean, like, yeah, it's amazing. It's seriously amazing that that fight that he was able to pull out that war. And that's like one of his most memorable fights. And it's like, dude, he had like 2 careers even before that.
That's what we're saying, man.
That's nuts.
It's a remarkable thing. And then like when you listen to his interviews and you find out like the things about how he like prolonged himself, you know, apparently they said that he never ate meat, right? That they said he was on the Aborigine diet, that he called it, where he said that they would chew meat, then he would spit it out and just have the juices. That's what he would take. And that's how he said he was always able to make weight and not worry about it. And if that's true, that is the most disciplined thing I've ever heard in my life.
There's no
way I'm not going to be able to swallow.
Yeah, there's no fucking way, bro.
I'm not going to spit that out and just like take the juice.
Yeah, I mean that. You're kidding me.
Oh my God. So that's one. 2, again, the jazz music aspect. Like,
that's right up your alley for sure.
I mean, totally, man. Jazz and boxing go hand in hand, but that's the most like mellow stuff, especially too in Moore's heyday in the 50s. Where bebop is at the high right now, man. The talent that's out there in terms of music, you can't be beat. And Moore's friends with all of them. You know what I mean? Like he knows Miles Davis, he knows Dizzy Gillespie, countless other musicians that were out back then. You know, Hank Mobley, Lucky Thompson, all these other dudes. Moore's boys with them. So, and like his style too, man. Like he's not like a crazy, like he'll get in there and he'll slug with you, but like he's a thinker. You know what I mean? Like there's ways about him. He perfected that cross-arm defense for himself. Knew just how to box, knew how to take his time and like assess the situation. Not like he's the one who taught George Foreman how to relax in Foreman's second career. So you can kind of get a feel for everything, you know? And very, very another thing too that's sometimes overlooked about him, psychologically, there's not many fighters that were smarter than him because he would literally put these dudes in trances when he would fight them. After, you know, as his career has progressed and he looked older and stuff like that, Moore looked like an old man. It wasn't like, you know, sure, he was still fit, but he looked like an old guy. He was graying on the sides. His face looked older, everything. Like he looked like someone that should have been chilling back, playing, you know, cards with his buddies, not going in the ring over there and fighting and defending the light heavyweight title. And he had surgeries and shit too, where he had like deep scars on his stomach. You know what I'm saying? So as these young contenders like Tony Anthony and other guys, Harold Johnson wasn't a young contender, that was his rival, and others were coming up now in the ensuing years after he becomes champion. They're seeing these things, and you see Moore just kind of looking like a withered old man, and you're like, man, I can whoop this dude. And Moore would talk to you. You know, there was talks to him, I think, when he fought Anthony. Anthony was, you know, going along with him, and Moore's talking to him throughout each round, and they're like, oh man, you know, you're looking really good in there. Wow, good shot. Man, you're so good, kid. Keep that up. Keep it up. You're going to be champ of the world. And then Willie Pastrana, for instance, talked about that. They said that when Moore got in there, Moore was talking to him, and he was like, yeah, man, you're looking great, blah, blah, blah. And they go back in the corner, and he's like, he's the sweetest man ever. And they go, what the hell are you talking about? Oh, he said X, Y, and Z. And they look at him, and they go, don't listen to him. The fuck? They're like, don't talk. Like, And
because he'd stand there and
yeah,
he'd just be like, do this little rocking shit.
and
He
he would
wouldn't
just be
even
talking to you.
move. He'd just like rock, and then you'd lean in and it'd be like, bap, left hook. Like, holy fuck, where'd that come from?
That's what Pastrano said. Pastrano said at one point he'd lull you in with all this sweet talk, and you listen to him, and all of a sudden Moore told him stand still, and then he did, because he stood still. He listened. He stood still. And Moore went pop, and then Pastrano was like, oh,
I believe it, dude.
Yeah.
Archie Moore definitely had a he was always seemed to be smiling, and he always seemed to be friends with everybody. He seemed to be pretty well liked
Yes.
overall, and he often had it's not like he invented the idea of like a public workout, but he often had open camps, like open training camps. He'd invite people to his training camps all the time. And he was always around kids for some reason. He seemed to like kids a lot. And anyway, yeah, and on top of that, right around by the 60s, by the time his career was winding down, he'd starred in a handful of movies, including what was it, Huckleberry Finn, or
Yep.
I think it was Huckleberry Finn.
He was in
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
But
because he was in the overalls with them. I forgot who he played in that. Yep, the whole thing.
Unfortunately, he played, the slave Jim.
Yes.
With I don't know. There's a whole lot more to say about that, but nonetheless, he was a celebrity and he was a star. He was well loved. And I mean, yeah, dude, an incredible puncher for, gosh, decades and decades. He was believed to, be the person to hold the knockout record for the most knockouts. I think in recent years they've revised it to say that Billy Bird is now the official holder of the knockout record. However, the kind of asterisk to that is that Archie Moore did indeed have a number of fights that they have not been able to confirm. And so it is possible that he still could potentially hold the record. But, bro, you're talking about when he started in the fucking 1930s, bro. Like, I mean, we're talking about he started in a time where record keeping in some places still could be like not that good. Not that we didn't know what boxing was at that time. Like, it was a well-established sport, but record keeping wasn't great sometimes. Or if a fight was on a card that wasn't very big, it might not have been recorded the same way. But then fast forward to the mid 60s, his last fight, Mike DiBiase, who is
Ted DiBiase's dad, $1 Million Man.
Yeah, the father of the $1 Million Man. By that time, boxing was a different animal, dude. It was all over TV all of the time. All sorts of organizations had been formed to keep records, and Boxing Writers Association, blah, blah, blah. How long Archie Moore's career was long enough to see a whole lot of shit, bro. It's like that fool says in Grandma's Boy. You saw World War I, World War II, Tupac.
Yeah, and it's just oh man, and then he became what was beautiful too is that for a guy that had such a long career, and he never suffered the ill effects of like brain damage or any CT, any of that type of stuff. He just became a great ambassador for boxing. He was always a helping hand, an easy listen for anybody that wanted to approach him. He became involved with George Foreman's comeback, and that was really really cool because it was like the generations crossing. Like, yeah, Moore was with Foreman when Foreman's first career, but then from Foreman coming back now he's the old man. Moore was an old man in his first career, and you're seeing George progress the way he does, and Archie Moore's training him. You're wondering what kind of advice is he giving this man to make him like last the way he's doing. And it was just cool to see. Like Moore was just always just a really pleasant person to see for anybody. You know what I mean? Everybody was just always happy to have him around. And he was a staple at the Hall of Fame. I never got a chance to meet him. Like I said, he died around, I want to say 99 or so, 98, 99. And my first year was 2000. But every year he was like, my dad always said that was the one guy he wanted to photograph because he had the most interesting face. And then he wore those hats with all the buttons all over it.
Yeah.
And the pins and shit. And one thing I'll say about Moore too, one of my favorite clips is and we've watched it. I posted it on Twitter before. The first year he got inducted, the inaugural year of the Hall of Fame, and you can tell, man, this is 1990. Canastota is still getting used to how to like set up events and things like that because this is held in some shim sham gym. This effect for like introducing all these legends. But when they introduce Archie Moore, They're like, it's Archie Moore, everybody. Moore comes out, waves and everything like that. The crowd's really cheering. He gets in the ring and Moore starts shadow boxing right around. And he looks good. Like he gets right in there, he gets in the stance, he moves, jab, he dances, throws a hook, parries a little bit, cuts off the ring type deal, and then he goes around and starts shaking everybody's hand. And like you said, he had made personal relationships with all the fighters. Like it wasn't just he was like, oh, hey, what's up? Like when he saw the guys he clearly were, comrades were back in the day, like Ike Williams and a few others who were champions during his era. He gave them all warm embraces because they were all boys back then too. But even the guys that came a little bit after him, that came a few decades after him, like Bob Foster, like Jose Napoles, and a few others, he came up, gave them warm embraces. He all knew them. He was like, Jose, yeah, my man, what's up? And they gave each other a big embrace. Like Moore was just that dude. What a beautiful human he was, man.
I never obviously got to meet him either. Yeah. My mom, believe it or not, actually took care of his son. Because my mom's was a home health nurse for many, many years, who she would go to people's houses. And usually it was people who had an organ transplant. Okay. She would go to their house afterward and take care of them. And Archie Moore Jr. was actually one of the people she took care of for a bit. And that's, that doesn't involve me in any way. But it's only to say, what's that?
Did she meet Archie? I'm sure then, right?
No, she didn't, because actually by that time he had just passed away. It was like right after he had passed away. And Archie Moore Jr. had a heart transplant.
Oh.
And and so I don't know that he's still with us. I don't believe he is. But in any case, long story short, Archie Moore Sr. had settled in San Diego. I can't remember specifically where he was from. I want to say Alabama, but I know he's from the South, but he settled in San Diego, lived in San Diego for many years. And one of the freeways in San Diego is called the Archie Moore Freeway. And also right off of that freeway, the Archie Moore Freeway, to my knowledge, the house that he lived in still has it. It's a swimming pool shaped like a boxing glove. Mm-hmm. And to my knowledge, the pool's still there. I'd have to look on like Google fucking Maps or Earth or whatever. But in any case, he became a San Diego boxing staple because for a number of years, San Diego actually did have a boxing community. It's not as much now, although it's starting to revive with Canelo training there. But, he trained a number of local San Diego fighters or helped out with a number of local fighters. So, I guess that's the only real connection I have to him. But beloved guy. Definitely somebody who seemed well liked in his time and still well liked now, even removed for so many years. I post photos of Archie Moore. People love the guy. So
should have bought that damn hat when I had the chance. 2017, they were selling his hat at the Hall of Fame.
Oh man.
And it was like cheap too. I think it was like less than $100. And I think Moore obviously had many of those. It wasn't like he just had one dusty hat. He kept
still though.
Yeah. And I'm like,
it wasn't like Don King and the one denim jacket.
And I should have just did it because that's just like a unique thing to say you could have owned. But
yeah, that's all right, dude. I mean, there's going to be plenty of chances. It's going to be plenty of chances to check out Canastota and whatnot in the coming years. But man, I do appreciate you once again having a conversation with me about the greatest punchers. It's a lot of fun, dude. Hell of a lot of fun.
This was a blast, always, man.
Yeah, man. I appreciate also. What's that?
We're just shooting the shit.
And that's really all it is, dude. That's what I think some people might not understand is we have like pretty much the exact same conversations like outside of when we tape ourselves having these conversations. This is just another conversation we're having for the most part. But no, dude, I appreciate it though, because I know a lot of people lately have seemed to have been tuning in and enjoying it, and I appreciate them. So I know that you're putting in the work, and It's cool, dude, for sure.
Absolutely, man. So I appreciate you all listening.
Definitely. Speaking of which, if you did listen in, please do subscribe via, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever it is you listen in. Give us a rating. That is helpful. But if you watched on YouTube, thank you. Hello. And also subscribe. Give us a reply, comment, those kinds of things. We'll reply. We'll get on there. We'll say something, or we'll reply on the next show. Either way. So thank you again. But we're also on social media. Knuckles and Gloves Podcast is on Facebook and Instagram. Also on Twitter, though. And individually, we're on Twitter. Aris is on there as Punch Zone Aris. me, Patrick Connor. I'm on there as Patrick M. Connor, and hopefully we'll talk to you there, Aris. Talk to you soon, bro.
Have a good one, y'all.
Later, everybody.